It is theorized by some that alien-human hybridization programs have been happening for decades. Many believe that thousands, perhaps millions of alien abductions reported are somehow tied to this, while some speculate these beings might just be curious, such as a marine biologist tagging a shark. Others believe that the being's intentions are much more nefarious. Some have speculated that these entities are creating a human-alien hybrid race that will eventually take over the planet. While the theory sounds ludicrous on the surface, there are interesting facts around these abductions that lend support to this theory. For example, we know many women alien abductees are abducted throughout their lives, and then the abductions seem to cease around their mid-40s, coincidentally around the same time as they are unable to have more children. In this episode, we will dive into a disturbing case of one woman's repeated abduction stories, the case of Terry Matthews. In 1970 in Paris, Illinois, Terry Matthews, then 22 years old, was driving home one evening when she would have an experience that would change her life forever. As Terry drove, she glanced off to the right and saw a gorgeous sunset on a crystal clear day. Then, bizarrely, in the next moments, the scenery around her suddenly changed. It was now very dark, and she found herself driving in a violent thunderstorm. She could barely see in front of her, and even more strange, it seemed as if something was pulling her car off to the right. For the next minute or so, she battled this invisible force, trying to keep her car on the road. Then, in an instant, a white flash appeared. The rain and storm stopped, and a confused Terry pulled over on the shoulder. She had no idea what had just happened. Terry was not injured in any way, but extremely confused over what had just happened to her. She got back on the road and began driving home. As she arrived home, Terry would be stunned to discover that she was over 2 hours late. Expected to be home at 8, it was now 10 p.m., and a confused Terry could not account for what had happened to her during those 2 hours. For years, Terry would continue to experience strange and frightening events in her life. She had strange bruises on her body and also other cases of missing time. She also saw several UFOs and nightmares so intense she believed them to be a memory of something. In sum, after much time, she came to the conclusion that she had been abducted by aliens. She couldn't recall much of what had happened to her though, and believed the beings had wiped her memory. Regardless, she wanted the truth, and Terry reached out to veteran UFO investigator David Jacobs. Jacobs was intrigued by Terry's story and suggested that hypnotic regression could possibly unlock some of these repressed memories. Jacob did warn her though that this could traumatize her and there would be no coming back once the memories were unlocked. Terry decided to press on, and Jacobs decided they should begin by trying to discover what happened on that drive home in 1970. As the hypnosis got underway, Terry would soon reveal that the weather drastically changed. She went on to say she pulled over the car, looked out the window, and saw a massive UFO that was silver-colored. Then up ahead, Terry recalled seeing 6 gray aliens walking toward her. A terrified Terry jumped out of the car and ran, but as she started running away, she was suddenly hit with a bright white light. The next thing Terry recalled was being inside the spaceship. Things would go from bad to worse for Terry here. The beings told her to undress and also remove all her jewelry. She laid down and the beings would inform her that she was pregnant. According to Terry, they would take her baby and replace it with another one. It's not clear what happened to the baby that was put inside her womb. Terry did have children, but based on our research, it seems like this occurred after these events. As for the baby inside her womb, we speculate that the baby was a hybrid and taken from her. As the regressions continue, they became extremely traumatic for Terry. She recalled seeing her children on board the craft several times. This was especially difficult for her, knowing the trauma they were going through. Terry began to start recording herself sleeping around this time, and according to her, this appeared to have stopped the abductions. 3 years after the first hypnotic session was done, Jacobs and Terry would revisit what happened on that first encounter. Surprisingly, Terry was able to recall more from that night. More specifically, Terry recalled seeing a hybrid woman carrying a baby. She didn't look right to Terry, as she had big eyes and looked angry. Terry would go on to say the woman was holding a baby and put it in her arms, telling her that it was hers. Terry didn't believe them, as this baby was different. First, it looked very frail, and its skin didn't match that of a human baby, appearing pink with shades of gray. Also, its eyes were much bigger than a usual human baby, similar to the woman's. Terry would also describe the baby's eyes as wise, as the baby appeared to be cognizant as to what was going on, unlike a human baby at that age. Terry also noted it didn't behave like a human baby, as it didn't curl up to be held. It's important to note here that Terry had children and was familiar with caring for an infant. One final thing Terry noted was that when they pulled the baby away, Terry was overwhelmed with loss, and as a mother, she knew that that baby was hers. What can we make of Terry's story? Unfortunately, the story lacks any hard evidence or other witnesses, as it's based solely on Terry's statements and hypnotic regression. That said, it surely seems like this event could have happened to Terry, and her case has several interesting aspects to it. The first is generational abductions. Simply stated, UFO researchers have found a disturbing trend where if someone is abducted, usually a parent or child, or both, are taken as well. This happened to Terry in her story, and there are several theories as to why this happens. One is that there's something in the genetic makeup that these beings want or need. There's different schools of thought on this, with some believing that certain bloodlines are better for developing hybrid beings. A second theory is that certain genetic traits make abductees easier to take. Some speculate that certain genes make people more easy to hypnotize and wipe their memories. The second interesting thing this case covers is the alien-human hybridization program. Many believe that these entities are taking people for the purpose of creating a hybrid species. Jacobs himself has investigated several interesting cases in which abductees have reported having to teach hybrid children how to act human and blend into society. This includes things like going shopping, basic social interactions, and blending in. These cases are particularly interesting and something we will explore in future episodes. While a good number of UFO researchers believe a hybrid program is underway and has been for a long time, it raises a number of questions, such as why? What's the endgame? David Jacobs has proposed that the true purpose behind these alien abductions is to create an alien-human hybrid race, one that will, in time, take over the planet undetected. Jacobs refers to this as a backdoor method, essentially meaning that when we finally discover what's happening, it will be too late and hybrids will be implanted throughout society. This concept was used in the 2013 TV show V, as the being's intentions were nefarious and they placed people in positions of power around the world. While Jacobs certainly has a terrifying perspective on this, many others feel that the being's purpose is not as malicious. Some suggest that these beings just want to understand human society and go out of their way, even not to traumatize people. They suggest that the memory wipes are done so that people won't have to live with the trauma. The medical experiments are done to understand us, and since they have the technology to perform these experiments and not damage us physically, they use it. As for hybrids, some feel that they are curious and want to experience our society. What one believes, though, is really a matter of opinion, as we simply don't know. That said, we know people are being taken, and that there seem to be a good number of medical procedures revolving around reproduction and reproductive systems. After years of hypnotic regressions with Jacobs, Terry would note that the abductions had stopped or significantly declined. By all accounts, Terry was able to move on and live a healthy and happy life. From time to time, we cover cases on this channel where individuals allege to have sexual relations with extraterrestrials. These cases, although difficult to believe and sometimes humorous, are ones that have led to numerous theories on the being's intentions. In this episode, we will dive into a little-known alien abduction from Texas, an incident that has come to be known as the Alvin Guerra alien abduction. In February 1982, in Mercury, Texas, a man named Alvin Guerra had just laid down to go to sleep when he would have an experience that would change his life forever. As Alvin was just about to fall asleep, he would spot a bright blue light shining in from outside. Alvin got up and, curious, decided to walk out to his patio and see where the light was coming from. As he stepped outside, he would spot a massive 75-foot dark gray craft hovering silently above. The craft blended in with the night sky for the most part, but did have 3 large rocket-type devices underneath it. Alvin would later describe the craft as being stealth-like. Then, on his patio, Alvin would hear a woman's voice call out to him.
"Don't be afraid. Cooperate, and we won't hurt you."
Alvin didn't see anyone initially, but then spotted a silhouette of someone. The person began approaching him, and as it stepped into the light, he could see a gorgeous tall blonde woman. She was around 6 feet, 2 inches tall, and had green piercing eyes. Her skin was quite pale, and she was wearing blue coveralls. The being had a strange emblem on the left side of her chest area. It was a short, narrow stripe, light blue color. Right above it was a darker blue stripe, the same size. A dark blue circle appeared beneath the 2 stripes. This is an interesting detail we will discuss more later in the video. Next, the woman would state once again,
"Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid."
She extended her hand, and as she made contact, a blue mist began to engulf the two. Alvin blinked, and the next thing he knew, he was inside the craft. The woman then told Alvin to follow him for a tour of the craft. As he walked through it, he noticed the walls were made of the same material as the outside of the UFO. Alvin then entered a room where he saw boxes resembling coffins. All the boxes were opened and empty. The being would tell Alvin that they went inside the boxes and rejuvenated for several hours each day. Alvin would move on into the next room, which was the cockpit. In there, he would see a larger version of the symbol that was on the woman's suit. 5 women were in the room working, and they would all smile at him. The women or beings were all similar in appearance, looking much like the first woman he met. Next, Alvin would then walk down another hall, and he would spot a room where 3 more women were working on some type of control device. One of the beings was extremely tall, being at least 6 feet 8 inches. He was then taken to a medical room. It was filled with around 20 beings, all appearing as women, and all very tall, around 6 feet 6 inches. Most of the beings were experimenting on animals and birds. One of the beings, though, approached Alvin and asked him to lay down on a medical table. The being was holding a dark blue colored laser and began shining it on him. The device would draw blood up from his skin. As he was laying back on the table, he would see a green screen above him. It's not clear what the screen was for exactly, but presumably it was some other type of screen used in medical testing. To Alvin's left, there was another black screen on the wall where he could see a holographic image of his body appear. After the test, he continued his tour with the original being who greeted him. At the end of the tour, Alvin would be escorted into a room, and there, according to Alvin, him and the being would have intercourse. Sometime during this, Alvin stated that he lost consciousness. He woke back up in his bed, naked, and would also discover his necklace, which he never took off, was missing. What can we make of this incredible story? At first hand, this surely seems like a dream, or perhaps one man's strange fantasy. However, before discussing the sexual relations claim, there are some things that he mentioned that we see time and time again from close encounter reports. First, the description of the beings is very typical, with the aliens appearing as Nordic beings. It is interesting, though, that Alvin reported seeing only female and that many of the beings were so tall. Usually, when Nordic beings, both men and women, are seen, they're reported to be around 6 feet tall. One interesting aspect of the case has to do with the emblem he saw. Alvin reported a symbol on the blue coveralls of 2 stripes with a circle below it. For comparison, in both the Filiberto Cardina case and the Herbert Schirmer incident, both witnesses reported the beings had some sort of serpent emblem on their chest. We covered both these cases, and viewers have pointed out this characteristic has been seen in other cases too. The final aspect of the case that seems to add credibility is that Alvin woke up naked after going to bed in pajamas and that his necklace was taken. Some will argue that Alvin could have sleptwalked and actually took off his clothes and ripped his necklace off himself. Some will say he could have also simply just lied. Cases of individuals alleging sexual encounters are not unheard of, though. On this channel we've covered a number of cases. In the Meng Zagua case, one of China's most famous alien abductions, Meng alleged to have sex with a 10-foot tall, 6-fingered alien woman for 40 minutes before the alien then disappeared through his wall. In the Antonio Villas Boas case, Antonio alleged to have sex with an extremely attractive alien with cat-like eyes. After they finished, the being smiled, rubbed her belly, and pointed toward the sky, indicating that they would have a baby together. The case of Alvin was published in the book Sexual Encounters with Extraterrestrials by C.L. Turnage. There are several theories as to why these beings might want to mate with humans. The most popular is that the offspring produces some type of hybrid being, possibly one that could blend into society. Many allege these hybrid beings walk among us, and have for quite some time. Another theory is curiosity and understanding our reproductive process. However, many scoff at this theory, as it seems like the beings would be able to figure this out another way. Some simply state most of these stories are created and are not true, or perhaps are lucid dreams. Still, we know that many have reported being taken from their homes, often floating through solid objects like closed windows and the roof. Often the similarities between the stories is remarkable. In some, it seems like these beings are capable of many extraordinary things, and many times the stories from those who communicate with them don't make much sense. That said, even if Alvin's story was fabricated or imagined, much of the phenomena is not well understood, and it's probably worth hearing out these far-fetched stories. For more than a decade, a young Canadian man would struggle with health issues and insomnia. The man was lost and couldn't quite seem to get his life together. Something was off, yet the man couldn't quite put his finger on it. Then one day the man picked up a copy of Bud Hopkins' book named Missing Time, and suddenly the man knew why he had been having problems. In this episode, we will explore this incredibly strange alien abduction from Canada, a case that has come to be known as the 1973 bandwagon alien abduction. Sometime in 1973, in Jordan, Ontario, 4 members of a Canadian band wrapped up a show at Alice's restaurant and began moving their instruments outside to their van. As they were packing it up, a strange man would approach the group and inquire whether he could grab a ride with them. The band didn't recognize the man, nor did they see him while they were playing their gig. Regardless, the band agreed to take the man, a decision that would haunt band member Thomas Campbell for years. While it's not certain that this person was not human, as we will see, all signs point to some sort of connection to the events that would happen to the band members. As the van pulled out of Alice's restaurant, the group began driving down a service road, with band member Guillaume driving, and the drummer and shotgun. The other 2 band members, including Tom, were in the back with the strange man. It's not known specifically why they took this route, and we will discuss later perhaps they were subconsciously influenced. As they were driving down the road though, the driver would suddenly spot strange lights up ahead. He didn't think too much of it at first, a common first impression when individuals first spot bright UFOs in desolate areas. However, as they drove closer, Guillaume would suddenly slam on the brakes. Thomas, who was in the back, would yell, "What's going on up there?" Guillaume responded, "I think you better come up here and take a look at this." The band members would all climb up, all except the strange man. There, the group were stunned to see a silver metallic craft blocking the road, and after some debate, decided to drive back to Alice's restaurant for the time. However, when Guillaume tried to turn the car around, he lost control of it. The car froze, and then began hovering toward the craft a bit closer until it was around 30 feet away. While the frightened group watched in silence, the strange man sat in the back, as if he knew this was going to happen, and perhaps, even more frightening, he had led them there. As they looked upon the craft, a hatch opened up. The drummer would spot the beings, and they would exit the craft. As the men sat in the van, the beings walked to the side of the van, and the band members watched as the beings tried to open the side door, but with no luck. Tom would see one of the creatures head right by the window. At some point during this commotion, the strange man would open the back door, and the band would be stunned to see 4 beings. They had white grayish skin with large black eyes. The beings had only 3 fingers, all of which were quite long. The beings were short, being around 4 feet tall, and also, interestingly, were reported by Thomas to smell like aftershave. This is a detail which we will discuss later in the video. One of the beings, who appeared to be the leader, climbed in the van. It was dark and tough to make out details, but telepathically the alien communicated to the men it came in peace and not to be afraid. The being asked the crew if 3 of them would come with them so they could run some tests. The group communicated telepathically they would. As the being first climbed out of the van, it would knock off some musical equipment onto the ground. The frightened drummer assured the being, who Thomas called the captain, that the drummer was okay. When Thomas grabbed some recorders to bring on board, the other band members were terrified and couldn't understand why he was bringing it. The captain read their thoughts and assured them it was okay to bring. Thomas, along with the bassist and drummer, would exit the craft and follow the beings. They walked through an egg-shaped door of which the drummer would bang his head hard upon entering. The captain checked to see if the drummer was okay, letting him know they could heal him. Once inside, the trio walked down a hallway, and this led to a room with 3 silver-colored cots. They were instructed to take off their clothes. Thomas asked if they could keep their underwear on, and the captain obliged. At this point, the bass player took off his pants, but had on long johns. The trio would then laugh at the situation, and according to Thomas, the beings even seemed to understand the humor of the situation. The situation seemed to indicate that the band members felt quite comfortable at this point, yet whether they should have is debatable. At this point, the aliens brought in a cart with metal instruments and other devices on it. One of the beings would first grab some sort of light device and shine it on Thomas's skin. Thomas didn't see the light, but as he looked at his skin, he could see everything: veins, arteries, bones. Thomas then laid back on a table, and the beings would do the same scan of his whole body. Next, Thomas was asked to look at a light. It seemed to hypnotize him and wipe his memories. Once Thomas and the other band members woke up the next day, they would forget the events. However, this story is far from complete. For the next 10 years, memories of this event were blocked for Thomas, and presumably also for the other band members. Then sometime in the early 1980s, Thomas would read Bud Hopkins' book, Missing Time, and memories of these events would come back. It's not evident what triggered it specifically, or if the events all came back at once, like what happens sometimes from people suffering from amnesia. That said, he couldn't recall everything. He still had missing time and events that he couldn't recall, and for that, he would reach out to Bud Hopkins, who would arrange a hypnotherapy session with therapist Dr. Aphrodite Clammer. Working with Dr. Clammer, Thomas would recall that night, after he was hypnotized by the strange object, he was taken to another room. Thomas was laying down and around 5 aliens would wheel over a large machine with several different types of arms, with hoses and instruments. The beings would check over his whole body, taking hair and skin samples and putting them in tubes. After this, Thomas was told to dress, and the other 2 men joined him. Altogether, the beings would ask the men if they had any questions for them. One of the band members asked, "Are you from outer space?" To which the beings responded, yes. One other question was, "Do you have bases on Earth?" The captain would respond, "Yes, we have many bases on Earth, some underwater, some in desolate areas where few people go. We have one here," pointing out to one of the portholes towards Lake Ontario. The next question Thomas would ask seemed to surprise the beings. What is the true religion on Earth? The beings were perplexed and answered, "Why would you ask a question like that?" Thomas responded by stating they were intellectually superior. The beings would state, "There is no correct religion on Earth," which seemed to surprise Thomas. 2 of the band members were then escorted out, with Thomas staying behind. The experience appeared to be a positive one, with the drummer smiling and waving back at the beings as he walked toward the van. Inside the ship, Thomas recalled he was going into a trance-like state and was overwhelmed with feelings of joy. Thomas was told that he had a special mission in helping their work and would be a beacon of light to people around him, helping people appreciate that aliens are real and that it was important work to do. He was then brought out of the trance-like state. Thomas then remembered the recorders in the bag, and he showed them to the beings. The being said, "What are these?" "Musical instruments. We play them for our entertainment." The being responded, "How do you play them?" Thomas said, "You blow air into them." Oddly, the alien didn't understand what it was being told. Thomas then put on a demonstration playing the recorder. The alien seemed to like it, and Thomas gave him one of the recorders as a souvenir. The being didn't understand what a souvenir was, though. As Thomas explained and gave it to him, he would notice the being had 3 fingers and nails that were long and curved down. The captain would then offer to walk Thomas back to the car, but Thomas declined. As he began walking back, he noticed his face was itchy, and soon he realized he had been crying. As Thomas came around the back of the van, he noticed that everyone was in a trance, sitting like zombies. The craft then suddenly shot off, and the group slowly began to come out of their hypnotized state. The strange man was now gone, and soon the group began to discuss what exactly they should do next. The drummer would say, "No, we can't report this. Everyone will think we are crazy. No one will believe us, and I don't want to be ridiculed over something like this." The guitarist, who didn't enter the craft, agreed on keeping it a secret too. It is thought the hybrid being stayed in the band and hypnotized the guitarist. Tom disagreed with the 2 and wanted to report the incident, but the group stated that if he did, they would deny the event. Still, perhaps what happened next was the most shocking aspect of this entire bizarre case. As the group was driving home, Thomas kept hearing a voice in his head saying, "You will forget this, you will forget this, you will forget this." Thomas fought it, and he fought it, and then finally, after some time, asked once again to the drummer and guitarist, "Should we report this?" The 2 men were completely baffled and said, "Report what?" The 2 men had already forgotten the incident. Thomas would return home, and that night, still fighting the command, attempted to write down the details of the night, but at some point he forgot and wound up going to bed. As stated, Thomas would recall many of the conscious memories after reading Lost Time, and the hidden ones through hypnosis. It's not known 100% how or what exactly triggered the memory recollection, but something in that book did. That said, what can we make of this fascinating close encounter of the fourth kind? The case has many interesting characteristics and elements that we see often in other cases. Perhaps the most interesting is the aspect of mind control. The beings seem to be able to clearly control the emotions and perceived experiences of the band members. In addition, they were able to block certain memories, while they seemed not too concerned with others. It's important to point out too that mind control and blocking memories is not really advanced. Even many humans are capable of hypnotizing others and getting them to behave in certain ways. Still, the interesting thing is that some people appear to be very easy to hypnotize, while others not so much. This is certainly relevant in this case, one in which the memories went away quicker for the band members than for Thomas. In addition to mind control and repressing memories, it is thought too the beings are capable of distorting perceptions, leaving many to believe their alien abduction experience was positive. This appeared to happen in this case, but looking at the facts, these men appear to have had their emotions manipulated. It's tough to imagine these band members would agree to be tested like they were. Many of the elements of the case are classic and things we see time and time again. The beings appeared to be grays and the craft was silver-shaped and oval. The craft grabbed them on a desolate road. Perhaps the only strange detail that didn't add up in this case is that the beings were said to smell like aftershave. In many cases, grays are said to stink and smell quite horrible. It's been reported in a number of cases, and often their smell is the one thing most people remember. There are various theories on why they smell so bad. One of them states that these beings are biological, yet have no organs to dispose of waste. Many theorize they excrete their waste through their skin. That said, some believe greys are not biological and are actually robots, and it's something in their technology. Coming back to the case, it's widely believed the hitchhiker was connected to the beings. He was said to look human and didn't act surprised when the craft appeared. He also opened the door, although it seems that the Greys could have probably done this themselves. One of the key questions is around the other band members too. They stated they would not admit the story, but did Bud Hopkins and Thomas try to track them down? Having even a second witness would have really added incredible validity to the case. Coming back to the questions to the beings, of the questions, it's tough to really conclude much. The beings said they were from outer space, but it's possible they live hidden on Earth or in a different dimension. Probably the most interesting question has to do with the bases on planet Earth. It's long been thought ETs have bases on Earth, and we've seen this on prior episodes. The religion question seems open to interpretation as well, although some might see it as evidence we were seeded by something else. Still, perhaps the most frustrating thing about this case is the beings told Thomas he had a special purpose and that he would be instrumental in letting the world know about the beings. We see this in quite a number of cases, and it also draws a lot of criticism for several reasons. The first one being, why don't ETs ever take world leaders or people who have the ability to really change things? Another reason is, why take someone, tell him what they told Thomas, and then wipe his memory? That said, Thomas, after his sessions with the hypnotherapist, was able to uncover many more alien abductions that happened to him. Some of them are quite incredible, and one even involved his father, which isn't that surprising, as there are many cases where multiple family members are taken. In 2008, one of the strangest and most unbelievable alien abductions in the history of Ukraine occurred. 34-year-old Vladimir Voronezhsy and his 29-year-old wife Olga, both alleged to be taken by extraterrestrials. Both claimed that on board the ship, they would be subject to medical experiments and also converse with the beings. In addition, the beings expressed a strong desire to understand human emotion, something we have seen quite a bit. The story garnered quite a bit of attention in Ukraine, with the couple appearing on the TV show Pro-Life in Moscow, Russia, and also passing a polygraph. In this episode, we will examine this incredibly weird case, the alien abduction of Vladimir and Olga Voronezhsy. On the evening of January 11th, 2008, Olga Voronezhsy was relaxing at home, enjoying her maternity leave. Olga needed to pick up a few things from the store, so she asked two of her daughters, 9-year-old Vanessa and 8-year-old Angelica, to run out to the store for her. The two girls would head out, and when they returned home, they reported a strange object up in the sky. According to the girls, the object was flashing white, yellow, and red, and didn't appear like anything they had ever seen. Olga thought they were mistaken, but soon agreed to go outside and look. There, she would spot a strange yellow light in the distance, but being pretty far away and pretty high up, Olga and her husband didn't think too much of it. The family would then return inside and soon went to bed. Around 2 a.m. on January 12th, 2008, Vladimir woke up to a white, violet light in his room. He glanced, rolled over, and fell back asleep, not thinking too much of it. His daughter Angelica, though, wouldn't be able to sleep through it. She woke up to the light shining through her blinds, then ran into her parents' room and woke up her mom, Olga. As Olga woke up, she was frightened and shook her husband Vladimir until he got up. She then screamed at him to look up to the sky, and to their surprise, their ceiling was completely transparent. There was a huge disc-shaped UFO flying right over their bedroom. Vladimir and Olga hurried outside to view the craft. Then, the two, engulfed in the light, became paralyzed and couldn't move. Olga would then start to hover and be pulled upward. She was spinning as she was ascending, and would later recall she couldn't move. Vladimir would then be pulled up, and soon the two woke up in a transparent room, both paralyzed, unable to move. Soon 12 beings would enter the room. They were all short, around 3.5 feet tall, gray, with black lifeless eyes and 3 fingers. While these appeared to be grays, Vladimir would later recall the beings wore hoods that covered their faces most of the time. There was one being who appeared to be the leader. He stood in the back and was around 6 feet tall. His face was covered completely, but his body resembled a man's. The entities would then grab Olga and drag her into a chair nearby. An upset Vladimir, now free from his paralysis, ran toward Olga, but hit some type of invisible wall. 2 small beings approached him and informed him telepathically he needed to calm down, and that they would soon be home safe. Vladimir, though, wasn't satisfied with the answer and became increasingly hostile. The beings, seemingly confused, tried to subdue Vladimir, but Vladimir was a martial arts expert and was able to escape from them. The bewildered aliens would continue to telepathically ask Vladimir why he resisted, as if his efforts were pointless. They stared straight into his eyes each time they telepathically spoke with him, and oddly the language Vladimir heard was Syriac, which is a combination of Russian and Ukrainian languages. Regardless of his efforts, though, the beings were able to overtake Vladimir. They then stuck 4 metallic rods into his chest, and Vladimir was completely paralyzed. He couldn't move at all other than his eyes, and he was forced to watch the beings experiment on his wife. The experiments on Olga were surely strange. While Olga was standing up, they had managed to slice open her stomach, although Olga never felt a thing, she says. She was asked to lay down, and as she did, she could see the inside of her stomach and also smell her organs. Olga would watch as the entities extracted samples from her organs. She felt no pain at all, and after they were done, they used some type of tool to stitch her back up. Amazingly, her stomach had no scars whatsoever, and it looked like nothing had even happened. During the operation, the aliens communicated telepathically with her and informed her they wouldn't hurt her and that they were just curious. One interesting thing surrounding the procedure is just prior to it, Olga had been having stomach pains, and after this operation, her pain would stop. While this was occurring, Vladimir underwent some experimentation as well. The beings would insert some sort of round object into his head. Although Vladimir reported no pain, they informed him that the male species appeared to be more developed than the female species. Vladimir was then taken to another room where he was introduced to a 6-foot-tall being the smaller aliens referred to as the Professor. In a prior episode on this channel, the Amaury Rivera alien abduction, a being was described by alien abductees as named the Professor. However, there appears to be differences between the two, and it doesn't seem this is the same being here. Vladimir would ask the Professor why they were taken, to which the Professor responded, "It has to be done." He did inform Vladimir, though, to compensate for their suffering, the two would be taken on a tour throughout the galaxy. Olga and Vladimir were then placed in recliners, and the room turned fully transparent. The stars and planets were all around them. Then a bright flash occurred, and the two were now hovering over an unknown planet. The beings then guided them to another room where they boarded a smaller craft, which was cigar-shaped. They then broke off from the mothership and flew down to the planet below. There, they appeared to be mounds, similar to anthills, where the beings lived, and Vladimir speculated they lived under the surface. According to the Professor, the planet operated under a strict set of rules, similar to an ant colony or beehive. The Professor would go on to tell him that the beings didn't eat or drink, but absorbed nutrients through the skin. They were interested in us because we, human beings, display characteristics such as happiness, sadness, jealousy, and other emotions. The beings lived more like machines. The two would travel up to the mothership again, and soon another flash of light was emitted. Olga and Vladimir were at a different place in outer space now. At this point, Vladimir would ask how they were able to travel so quickly. The Professor would explain how they did it, but Vladimir said he couldn't understand it. While this was disappointing, surely Vladimir couldn't have retained more of the answer. It must be pointed out, he did mention wormholes to the beings, and that didn't appear to be how they did it. After the explanation, though, allegedly, according to Vladimir, one of the smaller beings was upset and telepathically told the Professor they know too much now. Vladimir was able to hear this, and a conversation ensued whether they should be terminated or not returned home. According to Vladimir, he became hostile and threatened to become violent and uncooperative if they kept him in outer space. Things seemed to calm down after this, and what happened next would be perhaps the most shocking aspect of this story. Vladimir, with Olga in the room, was asked by several of the beings to have sex with a female being. According to Vladimir, the woman was hideous, though. She was bald with green skin. Vladimir rejected her, citing her appearance to the beings. The extraterrestrials, though, were very interested in how humans had sexual intercourse, and Vladimir seemed to think him and his wife's return to Earth depended on this. The aliens then walked the female alien to a platform where a bright light shone down on her. After the light faded, a new woman appeared, one with a beautiful face, exactly Vladimir's taste. Vladimir then came to the stunning realization they had read his mind in terms of what he believed a beautiful woman should look like. Still, though, oddly, the being's body was being covered up by some sort of sheet in front of her, and Vladimir couldn't see the body. As the beings were sizing up whether Vladimir would go forward now, soon the sheet would disappear, and Vladimir began to make love with the being. At this point, Olga screamed at the extraterrestrials to make it stop. The beings, though, not only wanted to understand human sexual intercourse, but wanted to gauge Olga's emotions and the feelings of jealousy. After Olga became increasingly upset, Vladimir would soon stop. Olga would explain to the beings that humans don't just mate, that there must be feelings and emotions involved. Since the beings couldn't have these feelings, emotions of jealousy, love, and anger, this is what they wanted to understand. The professor would ask the two how they were able to survive with their emotions. The professor would also tell them that death didn't exist and implied that humans would be reincarnated. At this point, Olga and Vladimir were returned home. The beings stated they would contact them again in 2 years, the year 2010. The next day, the two woke up and both initially thought it was a dream. They then both soon realized it wasn't and began discussing the incident and the identical memories they had. Vladimir would soon call a friend in Kiev and was put in touch with ufologist Yuri Stepanov. Stepanov would perform hypnotic regression on Vladimir. Vladimir was able to remember some additional things, such as a plasma field surrounding the craft. Soon the two would have a medical examination done to see if any alien implants had been put in them. None were found. One other strange effect of the incident was that Vladimir's gray hair turned back to its original black color. Olga would also experience unexplainable medical effects. Her chronic colitis was cured. It's not known whether the two were contacted again in 2010, but like many UFO cases, there were many skeptics. Locals accused the couple of being drunks and crazy. They were able to appear on television, though, and the case became quite popular. Still, what can we make of this incredibly bizarre case? Like many alien abductee cases, there is no tangible proof, and most of the credibility of the case comes from the reliability of the witnesses. Although Vladimir and Olga were able to pass a lie detector, later reports say they did fail one. Much of the credibility of this case really comes down to the story in of itself. There's certainly characteristics we see in other cases. For example, paralysis and medical experimentation are things we see quite often in alien abduction cases. It should also be pointed out that sometimes people report traveling the galaxy and visiting distant alien planets. Most of the time, those stories are not taken seriously outside the UFO community, and even sometimes there can be skepticism. One thing that sticks out in this case is the being's lack of understanding of human emotion. We tend to see this quite a bit, and it leads many to believe aliens, such as the Greys, are robots and not biological in nature. There were also multiple witnesses, albeit a husband and a wife. Separately, while many think the being's interest in sexual intercourse seems weird and made up, it seems like it's not that far-fetched. The beings believe humans mated like animals and did so regardless of emotion. Were these beings here to see if they could acquire the one thing they don't have, human emotion? It surely seems possible. We've had reports of beings trying to study the human soul. Perhaps the beings aren't capable of acquiring human emotion in the same way humans aren't capable of being devoid of feelings. On August 13th, 1975, around 1:15 a.m. in the morning, Air Force Sergeant Charles L. Moody, then age 32, was watching a meteor shower in Alamogordo, New Mexico. All alone out in the desert, Moody was enjoying a peaceful night when suddenly he would spot a bright, metallic, dish-shaped object heading toward the ground around 300 feet away. What happened next would change this man's life forever. In today's episode, we will examine the alien abduction of Air Force Sergeant Charles Moody. On the night of August 13th, 1975, as the unidentified flying object headed down toward the ground, it began to wobble until it was around 20 feet off the ground. Moody would later describe the craft as being about 50 feet long and 20 feet wide. Then the craft began slowly moving in Moody's direction. A frightened Moody ran and hopped in his car. However, when he tried to start his vehicle, it wouldn't start. As the craft kept coming, it reached about 75 feet away from Moody. He then heard a high-pitched screaming noise, and as he glanced up, he saw a rectangular window in the craft. He looked in and saw shadows that resembled humans. The humming then stopped, and Moody felt numb all over his body. He would then look up, and the craft flew off into the sky. Still, something didn't feel right about what had happened. Regardless, Moody was finally able to start the car and sped home terrified. When he arrived, he was stunned to see what the time was. It was now 3 a.m. Moody had sensed something was wrong driving home, but now there was an hour and a half of unaccounted time that night. He went to bed still frightened and woke up the next day with severe back pain. A few days later, a strange rash broke out all over his body. Moody would speak with a doctor who recommended trying self-hypnosis to see if he could uncover what had happened to him. Self-hypnosis is said to allow the mind to relax and remember events. Moody would practice self-hypnosis the next few weeks, and what he discovered would leave him stunned. On the night of August 13th in the desert, Moody recalled that as the numbness first came to his body, he looked out the windshield and two beings began walking toward his car. The creatures were around 6 feet tall and wore something black that was tight-fitting, resembling a wetsuit. They were able to grab Moody, and soon after he passed out, he woke up inside the craft and was on a table. Moody was paralyzed and couldn't move. The aliens stood around him, with the leader by his head. There were 3 total. The leader wore white and was shorter than the other 2, being around 5 feet tall. All had similar features, such as large hairless heads, a big roundish eyes, small ears and noses, and very thin lips. The leader was whitish gray, while the others were a darker shade of gray. The leader asked Moody telepathically if he was ready to start behaving and stop fighting. Moody agreed to stop fighting, and the being touched his back with a metal stick, which stopped the paralysis. Moody was then taken around the craft and shown different parts. The being showed him the engine room and explained that the ship operated using the principle of positive and negative magnetic poles. Also, they told him that they had a huge mothership and there were many other races of aliens who were observing and studying the planet. The beings warned him against the use of nuclear weapons as well, something we've seen in many other cases. Strangely, Moody was promised a future meeting with the beings, but was warned that contact with Earthmen would not be attempted for another 20 years at least. During his tour, Moody was told the mothership was miles away from Earth, around 400 miles above in space. Moody would also be told one day the beings would reveal themselves to the people of planet Earth. They then told him he would forget the incident, but his memories would return in about 2 weeks. The leader then placed its hand on Moody's head, and he would next wake up in his car. New Mexico is said by many to be the UFO capital of the world, home to the most famous UFO event in history with the Roswell incident. The state also possesses some extremely remote areas and mysteries. These include legends of a secret alien underground facility named the Dulce Base. In addition, a strange humming sound only some people can hear comes from the small town of Taos. Only around 2% of people can hear it, and the source of it has never been discovered. New Mexico has a long history with UFOs and unexplained phenomena, and the Moody incident is one of the many strange cases that have occurred in the state. So what do investigators say about this case? Like most of these cases, there's both skeptics and believers. Charles McQuiston, co-inventor of the psychological stress evaluator indicated that he believed Moody was telling the truth. However, investigator Jim Lorenzen wasn't so sure. He noted there were a couple inconsistencies in Moody's story. For example, he initially said the beings said the mothership was 400 miles away. At a later time, though, it's reported he said the mothership was 6,000 miles away. One thing he questioned too is that Moody described the two beings who took him as frail, yet they were over 6 feet tall and able to pretty easily take Moody. However, we should point out that Moody estimated that the beings weighed around 110 to 130 pounds each, which surely sounds frail. In addition, the beings, although weak, probably used advanced technology in order to incapacitate and take Moody. So what can we make of this bizarre case? In general, this case has several interesting characteristics that tie to other cases. For example, the being's appearance is very typical of what other alien abductees report. In addition, the beings warning Moody about nuclear weapons and taking care of the planet is something we see time and time again with alien abductees. For example, on this channel, we covered the case of Amaury Rivera, and he was told by the beings the importance of taking care of the planet. Paralysis is another feature we also see in many alien abductee cases. It's unclear whether Moody was ever contacted again by the beings. He was 32 when this occurred, so if he's alive today, he would be in his early 80s. That said, it seems more than likely that he wasn't contacted. This is based on the assumption he would have reached out to a UFO investigator if he had another experience. Still, it's unclear, and it's very possible too he had his experiences and his memory wiped. One final interesting thing the being said was that there was multiple alien races visiting and studying planet Earth. With so many alien types reported, this doesn't seem that far-fetched. Still, it appears that something is stopping these beings from revealing themselves. Hopefully, though, these beings' intentions are benevolent and not evil. In December 1978, an Italian security guard would have one of the strangest alien encounters in the history of his country. In time, the man would allege he had been abducted by aliens at least 11 times. While the case sounds too far-fetched to be true, there is a surprising amount of circumstantial evidence to support this man's claims. There was physical evidence found at the scene, as well as testimony from people in the area on several occasions. His initial case garnered widespread media attention in Italy at the time, prompting media around the country to investigate. Soon, he would undergo hypnosis on live television with hundreds of thousands watching. The strange events around this man became quite controversial, and we will soon come to know why. In this episode, we will explore this unbelievable case, the story of Pier Zanfretta, and several of his alien abductions. On the night of December 6, 1978, security guard Pier Zanfretta was driving in inclement weather toward the home of a client, Dr. Voronezhsy. The home was located in Torriglia, which is located around 20 kilometers northeast of Genoa. Around 11:30 p.m., Pier Zanfretta's life would change forever. As he arrived at the home, suddenly his car lost power. He looked out his window into the garden of the home and saw 4 strange lights. He believed it was thieves, so Zanfretta got out of his car and snuck into the garden quietly, hoping to surprise the trespassers. As he headed in, he walked next to a rock wall, hoping to stay hidden. Then, Zanfretta felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned around expecting to see one of the burglars, but instead was greeted with the sight of some sort of hideous monster. Zanfretta would later describe the being as huge, at least 10 feet tall. He said it had wrinkled, greenish skin with large yellow triangular eyes and red veins across its forehead. It was also wearing something that resembled a tunic. He said the creature was hideous and repulsive. A terrified Zanfretta ran back toward his vehicle. Right as he was about to approach it, though, a bright light lit up the area. He glanced behind him and saw a massive, triangular-shaped craft. Zanfretta was blinded, but also bewildered. He couldn't get over the size of the craft, which was bigger than Dr. Rigi's home. Zanfretta then stated something hit him, some sort of heat beam, which incapacitated him. Despite this, Zanfretta, at 12:15 a.m., was able to stumble to his car and radio his superiors. Carlo Tocolino would take the call and later testify that much of the conversation was garbled. Also, when they did communicate, Zanfretta seemed terrified and was acting hysterical, leading Tocolino to believe foul play was involved and he was being assaulted. Still, it wasn't clear what was happening. For instance, Tocolino would ask who was attacking him, and Zanfretta said, "No, they aren't men. They aren't men. My God, are they ugly?" Communications then suddenly stopped, and Tocolino escalated the situation to his superiors. Another patrol was sent out. However, with the roads so icy, it would take an hour for them to arrive. 2 patrol officers, Walter Loria and Raimondo Maschia, arrived to the scene and found Zanfretta. He was lying right in front of the home on the freezing ground. When Zanfretta first spotted the security guards, he hopped up and pointed his gun at them. The 2 security guards identified themselves, but Zanfretta seemed out of it. He didn't recognize them and was acting extremely unusual. This was very strange, as Zanfretta was usually reserved and shy. His colleagues described him as a loving family man. With no other choice, the 2 guards bum-rushed Zanfretta and disarmed him. As they tackled him, they couldn't believe just how warm his body was. This made no sense, since it was freezing outside. That night, the matter would reach the Italian police force, and they would help with the investigation. They arrived on the scene, and they would soon discover something to lend support to Zanfretta's story. The grass was covered with frost that night. Behind the home, the police found 2 large indentations. They were around 9 feet in diameter and resembled horseshoes. Most notably, though, something had penetrated the frost-covered grass that night. Something heavy. Most speculate these marks came from the landing gear of the UFO. As word spread about the event, it shook the community. Pier Zanfretta was a level-headed family man, known for his integrity and honesty. Still, eventually the press got a hold of the story, and stories spread across the country around the incident. Most ridiculed him, although some looked for other explanations. One reporter that would become interested in the case was Rino Di Stefano, a journalist from Genoa who wanted to investigate the case. Unlike many of his colleagues, the case didn't make sense to him. He pondered why this family man with a good career would risk everything. In addition, over 50 residents in the area would report seeing a bright light in the direction of the site that night. They all confirmed the strange lights occurred around midnight. After several conversations with Zanfretta, Stefano would also observe just how shy he was. He certainly didn't want to be in the limelight and had been getting harassed over his story. Stefano wanted to uncover what happened to Zanfretta when he was unconscious. He suggested meeting with Dr. Mauro Moretti, a psychotherapist and member of the Italian Association of Medical Hypnosis. Dr. Moretti would perform the hypnosis, and we would learn the following in the sessions. Once under, Zanfretta alleged the hideous beings abducted him and took him someplace, which was very hot. There, they interrogated him and probed him. The beings used some sort of voice box to communicate with him. It translated whatever they were saying into Italian. The creatures would inform Zanfretta they were from a planet called Titiona. Perhaps most terrifying, the beings would tell him they would come back one day with more of their species. While this revelation was terrifying enough for Zanfretta, 3 days later he would have another horrifying abduction. Just 3 days after his hypnotic session, Zanfretta was taken again. This story is pretty incredible as well. Zanfretta claimed that he was driving his car through the Bargaglia tunnel near the Scofera Pass. Then suddenly something took control of his car. Zanfretta was panicked and radioed in his car that it was actually driving by itself. The car exited the tunnel and Zanfretta tried to brake or take control of the car. The car would go about a mile, and then once again a bright white light illuminated everything around him. He would be discovered around 1 a.m. in the morning once again. The scene was extremely strange. Sergeant Emanuel Travanzoli would find Zanfretta in a field down the road. It was pouring rain outside, yet when Travanzoli touched Zanfretta, he was warm, just like last time. His clothes were also remarkably dry. Zanfretta was said to be shaking in fear and sobbing. Perhaps even more perplexing was the conditions of the car. The top of the car was blazing hot, as if it had been sitting in the sun. The officer would open the door, and it was scorching hot inside. One would even describe it as the same temperature as an oven. Again, it was raining and winter at this time. Zanfretta was a mess. As the officer spoke with him, he kept saying, "They say I must leave with them. What about my children? I don't want to. I don't want to." More indentations were found at the scene too. This time though, they appeared to be footprints. His car, a Fiat, had boot prints all around it. They were massive, measuring 20 inches and about 8 inches wide. This was documented by the Italian police and remains one of the critical pieces of evidence for Zanfretta's claims. One other strange thing that happened that night was Zanfretta fired his weapon 5 times, although he can't remember discharging it. With so much criticism, and to prove he wasn't lying, Zanfretta agreed to go under hypnosis once again. This time though, the event would be televised. Hundreds of thousands watched, and during the televised event, Zanfretta would recall wearing a helmet that allowed him to communicate with them. The event was not perceived well with the public. Many believed he was lying and fabricated the whole event. A third alleged alien abduction occurred on July 30th, 1979. That night, Zanfretta would be on his motorcycle patrolling when he was taken. Zanfretta would undergo hypnosis once more. This time though, to prove he was telling the truth, at his request, he was injected with sodium pentothal, or a truth serum. Once the truth serum kicked in, Zanfretta claims he was lifted up by a green light and entered a UFO. The truth serum gave more credibility for Zanfretta. Many experts would say it's almost impossible to lie under a truth serum. Zanfretta would go on to have more abductions and encounters. On one occasion, a man approached him at a gas station. The strange-looking man told Zanfretta to drive into a nearby cloud. Zanfretta recalled that for some reason, he obeyed the commands as if they were controlling his mind. On one other occasion, Zanfretta was taken. 4 security guards, upon approaching the area, would spot a mysterious cloud in the sky. It shot a beam of light at their car, and one of the men saw something he couldn't forget. Sadly, he would commit suicide just months later. What can we make of Pier Zanfretta's alleged alien encounters and abductions? It's certainly an interesting one and controversial. First off, it's odd to get a case with such strange claims that seem to have some credible support. Usually, very strange cases are just one eyewitness and often only supported by hypnosis. It appears Zanfretta encountered an alien type known as reptoids, or the reptilians. These are usually widely dismissed outside UFO circles and are considered to be just conspiracy theory. most alien abductee reports involve gray aliens or Nordics. While this case feels too strange to be true, it has an enormous amount of circumstantial evidence. On the first occasion, physical evidence was found at the scene, as well as Zanfretta's body was warm. In addition, over 50 people saw a white bright light that night. On the second abduction, there was quite a bit of physical evidence at the scene, including the hot car and a dry, warm Zanfretta. On the third case, Zanfretta alleged to be abducted under a truth serum, which is pretty difficult, maybe impossible to do. In total, there were at least 60 witnesses who claimed to have seen strange, unexplainable evidence or witnessed the bright light or craft. One man was so traumatized that sadly he chose to take his own life. Still, many speculate this was all a charade by Zanfretta. Many say that an ambitious journalist, Stefano, teamed up with Zanfretta to perpetrate the lie. Were all the details accurate from the first abduction? Perhaps a truth serum was never injected. Many questions have swirled around this case, including the credibility of the hypnosis sessions and whether we should even trust these. In addition, Zanfretta was supposed to be shy and timid, but why was he giving so many interviews and going on live television? It appears this case has no easy answers and will continue to remain controversial. In March of 1988, New York resident Amaury Rivera traveled to Puerto Rico in order to visit his grandmother. After several weeks, Rivera came back to his home in New York. However, his time in Puerto Rico proved to be especially important to him. Even though many of his relatives were unemployed and more opportunities seemed available in New York, Amaury would move back down to Puerto Rico permanently just 2 months later. Little did he know this decision would change his life forever. In this episode, we will examine the unbelievable alien abduction of Amaury Rivera. In May 1988, Amaury Rivera moved back down to Puerto Rico. Amaury was attracted to the island. The culture, the beaches, and the lifestyle suited him better than the loud, polluted city of New York. Once he arrived in Puerto Rico, friends found him an apartment, and soon he would purchase a 1971 Toyota for transportation around the island. Soon he began working odd jobs, such as waiting tables and running a hot dog stand. With family and friends nearby, life was good for Amaury, and he was happy with his life. That would soon all change, though. On Mother's Day weekend in 1988, Amaury Rivera was asked by his cousin to wait tables and photograph an event at the Casablanca Club. Needing extra cash, Amaury obliged and borrowed his cousin's camera. The event that night was packed, with many people highly intoxicated, and the party going into the early hours of the morning. Around 4 a.m., Amaury packed his things and began heading to his car. He soon left and started heading home on a familiar route. Around 4:30 a.m., Amaury would enter a dense, white fog on the road. The fog wasn't unusual, though, as he had drove this route many times and seen the fog before, late at night. Then suddenly, Amaury heard a noise on the passenger side of the car. It sounded like someone was running next to his car. When he looked over, he was astonished to see there was someone there. It was short, and he thought it was a boy with a costume wearing a mask initially. However, none of that made sense. How could a boy be running and keeping up with the car? Also, why would a boy be out this time of night? As he looked closer, he became frightened. He attempted to speed off, but instead of accelerating, he actually hit the brake and the car stopped. The being was now in front of him. It was clear at this point that it was something else. The being had palish gray skin, large eyes, was around 3.5 to 4 feet tall, and was wearing olive, tight-fitted clothing. As he was staring at it, what he described as a hideous creature, another being appeared right next to his driver's door. The beings then opened both car doors, and at this point, in fear, Amaury passed out. He soon woke up, and to his terror, one of the beings was sitting right next to him in the passenger seat. Amaury was absolutely terrified. He didn't move, and the being would reach out, its long, pointy fingers, toward him, touching his forehead. Once again, a frightened Amaury passed out. When he woke up, he was terrified to see where he was. He was in a light, gray room with 14 other individuals, men and women, mostly looking Latino. The room was very peculiar, not appearing to have walls and having some type of optical illusion. The men and women sat in 3 rows, 5 each. In front of them, the 2 beings stood. Soon, another being would come in and greet the group. This being looked human, though. He was around 5'7", with a lean, muscular look. Amaury recalled it looked Latino. It began speaking to the group in perfect Spanish and introduced himself as Amaran. Amaran would state he was human as well, but came from the planet Ka. He stressed he was not there to hurt them. After seeing a group horrified and fearful, Amaran explained the other beings were harmless and were created by his people. He would go on to say that they were going to show them some projections. The projections weren't real, though, he stressed. The group began looking at a gorgeous landscape and were in a lush valley. They weren't looking at a screen, though. The entire room had transformed into a beautiful land. The human-like being and the small alien stood, watching the group. They were instructed to look at the sky. Soon the group began ascending, and were eventually over the trees. They kept hovering, and soon were well above Earth in space. They eventually reached what Amaran told them was Ka's solar system, heading toward the planet. The being, who Amaury named the Instructor, would begin to lecture the group on how humans had destroyed the planet Earth. During this time, Amaury would take notice of what was happening to the others around him. He was somewhat paralyzed, but he heard crying, trembling, vomiting from others. As they descended into the planet Ka, the land appeared gorgeous. From high up, Amaury noted that there was just one large continent with an ocean surrounding it. As they got closer to the ground, Amaury could make out a few more details. There were flowers everywhere, and eventually they flew over one of the towns. There, they saw glass pyramids, which the being told them were homes. The ground looked like it was a grass carpet, according to Amaury. They also noticed human-like beings. The beings waved at the group. There were mothers holding their babies, and Amaury remembered everyone was naked. Generally, the place was beautiful. While they watched the beings, it was complete silence inside the craft. The instructor would begin to tell the group about their people. According to him, death was very unusual. Amaury recalled not seeing anyone that looked over 25, and the being said at a particular age, people stopped aging. The instructor told the group that when they get injured, they are capable of regenerating quickly. The tour of the planet Ka continued, and the group would be shown several other places. This included the government center and also a farm that was tended by beings that looked like the smaller ones that had first taken him. Eventually the group came back to the original landscape, and the projection faded. The instructor began talking directly to each person. He stressed that we needed to start taking care of the planet, and he stressed that it had to happen. He called each individual one by one. When he got to Amaury, he was so scared he couldn't look him in the eye. The being wanted him to take care of the flowers and the trees. While the first projection was mesmerizing, albeit frightening for everyone, the second projection would be downright terrifying. The second projection began with a group in Puerto Rico looking up in the sky. As Amaury looked up, he noticed a massive rock, like a meteor, heading toward them from outer space. It was getting closer and closer. Even though it was a projection, the realism of the event can't be understated, as others began to faint, and Amaury himself was extremely frightened. It soon slammed into the ocean, creating a massive tidal wave that headed toward the group and the coast of Puerto Rico. It eventually hit shore, and Amaury recalled hearing others scream. Below in the carnage, the group could see washed-up homes and the island completely covered by water. All of the group, the men and the women, were horrified and crying uncontrollably at the sight. They could feel the event. They heard the sights and the sounds, as well as saw the death and the destruction. After this, Amaury would have his seat move toward the front for the third projection. The third projection was even more terrifying than the second. The beings took the group to the White House and began to lecture them. He stressed that the governments were purely self-serving and that they only looked out for their own interest. In the projection, the White House shook and crumbled to the ground. The instructor informed everyone that earthquakes and tsunamis would become part of everyday life in the future. The projection showed severe homelessness, starvation, and people in encampments. The instructor told them that the sea, too, would become polluted, and all life there would die. The population on Earth would sharply decline. The instructor went on to say that the rich and powerful would be okay. They would meet on a man-made island named Atlantis when the chaos began, leaving the common man and common woman behind. On the island, the people that ironically caused the disaster lived well. They would experience no suffering, and no one would be allowed to come and go from there. The island was shown to the group in detail. It was a pretty place, like paradise, with ice cream shops, people riding on bicycles, and lavish parties. The rest of humanity, though, was suffering as they struggled to find food, clean water, and medicine. In time, a gigantic earthquake would occur on Earth, destroying the planet, even the private island. The group was shown a view of it from space, and they could see a dust cloud formed over it. The group would then see an image of a group of survivors on Earth. A giant craft came down and saved the group, taking them to another planet. The instructor informed the group that when Earth became healthy again, they would take them back. The smaller creature then went around one by one, touching people on their foreheads. As it touched someone, he or she passed out. Eventually, it touched Amaury Rivera's head, and he passed out. Amaury soon woke up in his car. However, he was in a different place. The road was not the one he was on earlier. He looked up in the sky and saw the craft hovering away. At the same time, he heard military helicopters and planes coming to the area. He was still crying and overwhelmed with emotion from his experience. He stepped out of the car and snapped a few pictures before the craft flew off into the sky. He then proceeded to start driving, and after stopping and asking for directions several times, he finally arrived at home. He was exhausted and collapsed into bed and slept all day and until the next morning. He seemed to forget what had happened to him that day. A few days later, he gave his cousin back her camera. His cousin would develop the film and call Amaury She asked over the phone what were the pictures. A confused Amaury wasn't sure what she was talking about, so he went over to her home. As he went through the photos, he was horrified to see photos of the beings and the UFO. He saw the instructor and felt a deep sense of dread. His memory of the event somehow had been blocked, and he remembered the initial encounter. However, he couldn't recall what happened to him after he fainted until the time he woke up in his car. That truly terrified him. Amaury left his cousin's home quickly. Rushing home, climbed into bed in the fetal position. His family tried for hours to open the door, but he was non-responsive. He would suffer PTSD for quite some time after the event. His family was extremely concerned, but in time, he seemed to come with grips with his experience. Still terrified, it would take some time before he would tell his full story to anyone. In the following months and years, his experience got out, and he would encounter many strange government people. On one occasion, 3 agents, claiming to be from the CIA, came to his house. They demanded the photos and the negatives, and if he didn't provide them, they said they would make his life extremely difficult. The men came in the home and searched even, but couldn't find the photos. Eventually his photos would make it into the public and are considered quite credible. Amaury only released 4 of them from the event. In one of them, you can clearly see a military aircraft and what looks like a UFO. The photos were sent for analysis, and there was no evidence found of any type of tampering or altering. Interestingly, according to ufologist Colonel Wendell Stephen, the human-like alien known as the instructor that abducted Amaury has been reported by other abductees in the Puerto Rico area. There have been several cases in which that particular alien was reported all over the island, especially in the southwest part of the country. In addition, other abductees reported some of the same details that Amaury revealed. The Amaury Rivera case is certainly a fascinating one. There's quite a bit to unpack as far as what happened. To begin, the alien's message about protecting the Earth is one we hear time and time again with alien encounters and abductions. For example, we saw this in the Ariel school incident in Zimbabwe. There are other cases as well of abductees being shown projections or images. Still, it is tough to know how prevalent this is because it seems many are having their memories wiped. It appears in Amaury's case that if it had not been for the photos, he may have forgotten the event. It's not entirely clear whether the beings did wipe his memory or if the trauma was just too much and his subconscious buried the memories. While the Amaury case seems like something out of science fiction, the case appears to be quite legit. The witness appears credible and clearly suffered quite a bit after the event. By all accounts, Amaury Rivera was a happy, carefree man, and after the event, he became isolated. For quite some time, he worked and simply came home, refusing to go out at night. This case does raise some interesting questions though. For example, why were middle-class Puerto Ricans being tasked with changing humanity? It would seem more logical for the beings to abduct more powerful men and women if they truly wanted change. Another question concerns the projections themselves. The first projection shows the beauty of the planet Ka, but no one was invited to the home to stay. Nor was anyone given specifics around how they achieved such a utopia. The second projection has to do with the meteor. Is this what the beings plan to do to us if we don't clean up our act? This is what seems to be implied from this projection. The third projection shows the collapse of Earth. The beings seem to imply we are responsible for the daily earthquakes and tsunamis. At this time, there doesn't appear to be any weapon to the best of our knowledge, that can create these or alter nature this much. So the second and third projections appear to contradict themselves in terms of the message. One implies they punish us. The other is that through our actions, we punish ourselves. Many believe Amaury imagined the whole event. This is a valid concern, but much like the Carlos Diaz case on a prior episode, the photos appear to be pretty solid support. One final thing that must be pointed out is the message delivered to Amaury may have been misinterpreted. Even he admits this. Still though, it appears overall this is a solid case, and hopefully these beings have stopped their abductions. Over the years, there's been numerous reports of alien abductions. Often, these stories sound unbelievable, with bizarre events occurring and strange conversations with the beings. Perhaps one of the more stranger things that we've seen are some alien abductees reporting that DNA was extracted and some type of clone was produced. These allegations sound extremely far-fetched, but it's important to point out there are some cases of abductees reporting this. In this episode, we will examine one such case, the 1985 alien abduction of 23-year-old Xavier Clares. On July 21st, 1985, around 8 o'clock in the morning, Spaniard Xavier Clares grabbed several cameras and drove from Barcelona to snap photographs of Dolmen de la Pedra Gental of El Gargina. El Dolmen is a 5,000-year-old megalithic structure around 50 kilometers outside Barcelona. Xavier spent about 2 hours sightseeing the area and photographing the megalith. It was a beautiful day with no clouds in the sky, and Xavier was able to get a number of photos of the structure. After this, he began driving back home, and he returned. He would be shocked to see that his odometer was much higher than expected. Instead of just adding 50 kilometers, the odometer was now 300 kilometers higher. It didn't make sense, and Xavier had checked it before he left for the trip. The car was also dirty. There was some sort of sticky substance all over the seats. There was mud all over the wheels, even though the area he was in was completely dry. During that time, there actually was a drought in the area. Things would get even more strange from here though. When Xavier returned, all the stores were open in the area. This was odd because he left on a Sunday, and the majority of the stores were closed on Sunday in the city. As Xavier entered his home, his wife and brother let out a sigh of relief and began pressing him on where he had been. Xavier was confused as to what was going on. The two would go on to tell him he had been gone for almost 2 days. It was now Monday, around 6 p.m., and they had scoured the area looking for him. Things would get even more scary though for Xavier. Xavier began to look at his things for more details as to what happened. On one of his cameras, he noticed there had been some photos taken, although he never remembered taking them. Xavier decided to have the photos developed, and when he saw them, there would be several faces which he described as green and demonic. The situation had become much more frightening, and Xavier decided to consult a professional. He called Carol Ramis, a parapsychologist that he had known for years. Ramis would see the photos and realize the seriousness of the situation. After discussing it a bit more, Carol would discover that Xavier had been having strange encounters for years. He had been visited at night by the Greys. Xavier never seemed concerned though, as he felt they were benevolent and never harmed him. Carol wanted to uncover the missing time and what happened, so she suggested Xavier go under hypnosis. Professor Francisco de Assis Rovati Heredia, a noted Spanish parapsychologist, was selected for the job. Heredia was very experienced in conducting these sessions especially with alien abductees. During the sessions, Xavier would learn the following as to what happened. As Xavier was driving, he would spot a fog up ahead on the road. He remembered just how strange it was, since it was a clear and sunny day. He seemed to black out, and the next thing he recalled was waking up on the side of the road. A sticky substance began falling on his head, and he stood up to see a group of beings. They didn't resemble the ones that usually visit him in the nighttime, though. The beings insisted that he go with them, but Xavier didn't want to go. They insisted and said they want to see how he is. The next thing he remembered was going down to some type of slope or ramp. Xavier recalls heading down toward a cave, but he's unable to head back up. The beings appear to be enjoying themselves, and Xavier is disgusted by their appearance. They are all gray, really wrinkled, with some sort of liquidy substance oozing from their skin. In the cave, or wherever they are, the air stinks like rotten eggs, and Xavier recalled having trouble breathing. The beings then began communicating with him telepathically. They're speaking Spanish and telling Xavier they need to put a catheter-like device in his arm. He tries to fight back and resist, but the beings touch him and paralyze him. As they start to draw blood, Xavier asks where they are from. Telepathically, they tell Xavier they are from Cassiopeia. Xavier asks a few more questions, and then the beings state that they are going to clone Xavier. Xavier is terrified at this point and believes they will kill him once the replica is made. The next thing he remembers is waking up in his car. His replica is sitting right behind him in the back seat. The being looks just like Xavier, even wearing the same clothes. The only difference, though, is the alien has longer hair. The clone doesn't speak, but just creepily laughs at Xavier. The being would tell Xavier to drive and drop him off at the corners of Vallespir and Cons de Ballac in Barcelona. While it doesn't appear that Xavier would see his replica after this, several friends and family would tell him they saw him in places Xavier never was. On one occasion, a friend of Xavier reported that he saw him walking on Mercado del Duero. Xavier, though, hadn't gone to that area in months. The person would go on to tell Xavier the person he saw was wearing the clothes Xavier was wearing on the day he was taken. Xavier would later discover months after the event he had 3 triangular-shaped punctures on his left arm. What can we make of this case? It surely seems like a work of science fiction. However, there are some characteristics that lend support to the story. 1. Xavier mentioned the being spoke in perfect Spanish and telepathically. This is a detail we have seen in other alien encounters and abductions. There's various languages, of course, but the theme is the language was spoken perfectly. One other interesting detail is the fog on the road. That is something we have seen in other alien abduction cases. In 2 prior episodes we have covered on this channel, the Amaury Rivera alien abduction and the Bayamon alien abduction in Puerto Rico, a strange mist was reported both prior to those abductions. Missing time in the prior visitations provides some support as well, although missing time could be a number of things. While this case does have some credible things, the biggest glaring weakness is that almost all the details come when Xavier was under hypnosis. This is important as in it doesn't appear that Xavier has any conscious memory of the events. Most often we see individuals able to remember some of the events prior to hypnosis. Perhaps the strangest aspect of this case, though, has to do with the duplicates. This feels like something out of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, yet throughout history there has been multiple stories of people running into their doppelgangers. A well-known case, which was covered a long time ago on this channel, was the case of Percy Shelley, husband of Frankenstein author Mary Shelley. Percy was convinced he had seen his doppelganger, and months after this occurred, he would die at sea. Many believe that alien hybrids walk among us, and while there's no evidence of this, It's certainly a frightening thought. While the case of Xavier is definitely a controversial one, it's certainly interesting and hopefully one we can learn from. On July 28, 1952, Nevada man Truman Betherum just finished his work outside the town of Mormon Mesa, Nevada. In the location Truman was located, once upon a time the area was covered by ocean. Truman was a seashell collector and decided to drive his truck up a hill to a location that was known for having fossilized seashells. Once he arrived at the hill in the dark, he searched for an hour but had no luck finding any. After this, Truman climbed back down in his truck and fell asleep. Soon, Truman woke up and would be startled to see someone or something outside his truck. In this episode, we will explore the alien encounter of Truman Betherum. As Truman woke up in his truck on the night of July 28, 1952, he would be stunned to see 8 to 10 small beings around 4 feet tall outside the truck window. Although the beings were short, they had features similar to the typical man. They had light brownish skin, no wrinkles or any undesirable characteristics, and their hair was black and their eyes were dark. Truman would later say the beings dressed similar to Greyhound bus drivers. Then, as Truman sat in his truck, one of the beings began to speak to him. Truman didn't understand what it was saying though. The being noticed his confusion and then began speaking in what Truman would describe as perfect English. It said, "You name it." Truman responded by saying, "My God, you can speak English too?" At this point, Truman climbed out of his truck and then would be shocked to see a UFO around 75 yards away. It was silver and saucer shaped, appearing shiny as well. Truman would speak with the beings and shook hands with each one. There was what seemed to be a mutual respect for one another. Truman was curious as to who they were and what they wanted, so he asked who the leader was. The being informed them that their leader was on the craft. If he wanted to, he could come aboard and meet her. Truman obliged, and one of the beings gently grabbed his elbow and began to escort him to the craft. As they walked over, Truman sensed this being was very powerful and that Truman was at his mercy. As Truman got closer to the ship, he could make out more details. According to the beings, the diameter of the ship was around 300 feet. Truman noticed a 3-foot wide band that went around the craft around the center. Right above this, there was a door around 10 feet high and 4 feet wide. Truman would walk up a ramp and enter the ship. Inside, he would finally be introduced to the leader. The captain's name was Aura Rains. The being had light brownish skin with an attractive slender face and black hair. She wore a bright red dress and something that resembled a black blouse. Aura would invite Truman into her private space where the two would converse. The being would tell Truman that they were from the planet Clarion, which was on the opposite side of the sun. Due to its distance, and because it was behind the sun, we were not able to spot it. Aura and Truman would discuss several topics. First, Truman inquired how they were able to power their ships and travel so fast. Aura would inform him that the crafts were powered by the Earth's gravity. Her explanation, though, appeared to be too much for Truman to understand. The entity would then tell Truman about their home. Like we've seen in many other cases, the being described the planet as a utopia. There was never any wars, there was no disagreement, and the beings lived to a very old age. Everyone had everything they needed, and there was no social classes. According to Aura, the beings had the power to read minds and to see our planet from theirs. Truman would next hear from Aura that due to our violent nature and constant wars, we would not receive the information needed for long-distance space travel. She reiterated that they were tired of seeing us fight and that we couldn't be given advanced technology as we couldn't be trusted and might attack peaceful civilizations. Truman would speak with Aura for around 30 minutes total, and then walk off the craft. This wouldn't be the last time, though, that Truman talked with the beings. He would allege to meet Aura and the beings 10 more times. After some time, Truman would detail his experience in his book, Aboard a Flying Saucer in 1954. The book did very well, and Truman got his 15 minutes of fame, even appearing on The Betty White Show. Still, without question, Truman's claims were met with harsh criticism. Truman was one of many 1950s alien contactees, or people who claimed to speak with extraterrestrials. Usually contactees, unlike abductees, report positive experiences rather than negative. During this time, it is true many achieved fame by alleging to speak with extraterrestrials. So was Truman a con man, or did he actually have contact with these beings? Let's look at the arguments for and against this controversial figure. Proponents will say there's several reasons to believe him. One is that Truman stated the beings gave him a message we have heard all too often from experiencers and abductees. We are too violent as human beings. There are a number of cases, some of which we have covered on this channel, where extraterrestrials tell people how disappointed they are in our violent ways. A second thing that stands out too is the beings told Truman about their utopian planet. We often see this as beings tell people this. Truman also mentioned they spoke perfect English. This is a specific detail we have seen in many cases. Some believe that in these cases the beings are actually robots, and that explains the perfection in their voice. Some proponents will also say he described a very different alien species than usual. If he was creating a story, why wouldn't he just describe the beings as Nordic? Some of these details, which are tough to know, surely create intrigue in his case. But should they? It's important to point out just a few years before Truman made his claims, George Adamski achieved celebrity status by traveling the country and being paid to speak on his experiences. Still, Adamski reported meeting with Nordic aliens, while Truman alleged to meet with a species pretty different. One other thing to point out too is that Truman was alleged to be obsessed with Aura. It is said he hired a secretary simply because she possessed the same physical characteristics of Aura. Was Truman simply a man obsessed with Latino women? Or was this just him living out his fantasy? Or did possibly the being read his mind and Aura presented itself in the most attractive way possible? There are reasons, though, to be skeptical of this case. Truman definitely benefited both financially and gained much attention from his claims. During this time, many alien contactees achieved celebrity status, and it's not too hard to imagine one could desire this as well. Truman said the beings asked him to create an education center around extraterrestrials and stressed the importance of people learning about them. If Truman was picked, though, to be their human spokesperson, this raises the question, why didn't they provide Truman with any type of proof? At the end of the day, it appears that all Truman has is his word, and like many cases, witness credibility is a critical aspect, and Truman appears to possibly have been in it for the book deals and TV appearances. It doesn't definitely mean he fabricated the stories, but it makes them harder to believe. On the morning of August 12th, 1983, one of the most famous alien encounters in the town of Aldershot, England would occur. This older case continues to be extremely controversial among ufologists and locals to the area. That said, this close encounter of the third kind is quite interesting and one that deserves examination. In this episode, we will explore the Alfred Burtoo alien encounter. Sometime after midnight on August 12th, 1983, 77-year-old Alfred Burtoo grabbed his fishing gear and with his dog Tiny began heading down to the desolate Basingstoke Canal for some night fishing. After checking out a few spots, Alfred finally picked his fishing spot around 1 a.m. Then around 15 minutes later, Alfred would spot a bright light heading toward him. It settled down around 300 feet away, right next to the path next to the canal. After seeing the light, Alfred didn't think too much of it, as there was a military base just nearby. He poured himself a cup of tea and kept fishing, but soon things would get strange. First, Tiny began barking furiously in the direction of the light. Alfred, with eyes on the water, commanded his dog to stop, but Tiny wouldn't. Alfred then glanced over and saw two dark humanoid figures coming in his direction. He couldn't make out specifics on the beings at first, but Alfred wasn't too worried. This is because Alfred had a military background, and he initially believed the figures might just be coming to check on him. As Alfred smoked his cigarette, he began to make out more details on the figures. They kept approaching, and although he wasn't scared, he surely was becoming curious. The beings got closer and closer. Then, he would spot more details. They were around 4.5 feet tall, wearing green coveralls that covered their whole body. He would later recall there were no buttons or zippers, and it was as if the suit was molded to their bodies. Alfred couldn't see their faces, as the beings wore a green helmet with a black visor. The entities would get around 5 feet away and stop. Both stared at Alfred for several moments, while Tiny continued barking. Then they gestured to him to come along. Alfred would begin following them toward the light. One being walked in front, while another one walked behind him. At this time, Alfred was more curious than scared. He would later recall that some of this had to do with his military training, and some of it had to do with his age and failing health. As he approached the ship, which rested in the air, Alfred would climb the stairs along with the beings. As he entered the room, he had to duck down slightly as to not hit his head. The room was all black. It had 8 sides and was warmer than the outside. It had a foul smell, which Alfred compared to rotting meat. As he looked around, he would spot no bolts or screws on the walls, and it appeared to be smooth all over. During this time, Alfred could see the beings out of the corner of his eye. Then he heard some sort of noise, and the beings disappeared behind the wall. It's not clear if they just went through it, or a silent door just slid open, but now Alfred was standing in the room, all by himself. After a few minutes, in the middle of the room, a large shaft rose up from the bottom. Right next to it were 2 more beings, almost identical in appearance to the first 2. The shaft was large, around 4 feet in circumference. Then Alfred would be instructed to come over and stand under the light. He couldn't see any light, though, in the room. He stepped over to the right, and an amber light was right on him. It was glowing from ceiling to floor. He stepped into the light with no hesitation. While the light was shining on him, one of the beings would ask his age. Alfred responded that he would be 78 at his next birthday. He was instructed to turn around, and once he did, the being said, "You can go. You are too old and infirm for our purposes." Somewhat surprised, he left the craft and went back to his fishing spot. There he would grab a sip of tea and notice about an hour had passed. Alfred alleged to be unfazed by the experience and got back to fishing. As he was doing this, he would hear a noise from the craft and also see a bright white light. The craft then shot off into the night sky. Shockingly, Alfred would continue to fish all night, and then around 10 a.m. several policemen would walk by. He would mention the craft in his experience, and astonishingly, one of the policemen didn't seem surprised and even mentioned it was probably here to check out the military base. As the weeks progressed, Alfred found himself thinking more and more about that night in his experience. He wasn't sure of many things, but he did want answers. In October of that year, he decided to reach out to the local newspaper, the Aldershot News, in hope that someone else had seen the craft that night, or perhaps had had a similar experience. Alfred wouldn't find any other witnesses, but the event would draw the attention of several ufologists, such as Timothy Good, who would investigate the case. Good believed Alfred and thought he was telling the truth, although he wished that he would have tried to ask more questions to the beings. What can we make of this incredible story by Alfred Burtoo? Like many cases, there appears to be some things that make it seem genuine, while other aspects that make it seem fabricated. Many skeptics have questioned the story at hand. Some asked how Burtoo was able to remain so calm through the event. Also, what about his dog? It seemed to stay behind at the fishing spot, but some think the dog would have insisted on coming along. In addition to this, it's never good from a credibility perspective to wait months to report a story like this. This is somewhat of an unfair criticism, as it's understandable how people just want to move on with their lives. Still, Alfred was 77 and didn't seem to be scared of much. Several things in the story also align with other UFO reports. For one, the beings were near a military base. It's well documented, even in present day, that UFOs seem to get spotted near military installations. There's various theories on this, which include scary ones, like they are gathering intelligence data and assessing our defenses, and other ones suggesting they are just curious about our capabilities. One interesting case that has incredible similarities is the 1971 Finland forestry alien encounter, which we covered on this channel not too long ago. In that case, the being is described almost exactly the same way. The being in that case had green coveralls with a green helmet and a black visor. The only difference between these two cases, in terms of the beings, is that in the Finland case, the beings were described as 2 feet tall, while Alfred said they were around 4 feet. The Finland case happened 7 years before Alfred's encounter. Alfred alleged in the encounter the beings didn't want him because of his declining health. This is something we've seen in other cases as well, and not too surprising. Alfred had mixed emotions on this decision by the beings, though, as a part of him wanted to travel through the universe and get to do things few have done. With his declining health, Alfred would die several years after the encounter. There's rumors that a strong military presence now controls the area where the event occurred. It's reported to be tough to get into and out of, and some speculate the military has recovered crafts or possibly been in contact with the beings. Of course, none of this is known for sure. While we might never get the answers we want in the Alfred Burtoo incident, it surely is an interesting case to examine. In May 1978, a Polish man named Jan Wolski would have one of the most famous and controversial alien encounters in the history of Poland. The case of Wolski, who was then 71, led to numerous theories of what happened that day. Many of the elements he reported we've seen in other cases, albeit his case certainly has some unique characteristics. In this episode, we will examine this popular case from Poland, an event that has come to be known as the Emilsin incident. On Wednesday, May 10th, 1978, Jan Wolski woke up around 5 a.m. in the small farming town of Emilsin, Poland. That morning, Wolski began driving his horse cart off the farm and toward the village of Dobroba. Wolski was planning on meeting with another farmer whose stallion would breed with his mare. After the breeding was done, Wolski and his horse began heading back home around 7:20 a.m. on the back roads. Soon Wolski would begin approaching an open field and would spot what he believed were 2 hunters up ahead around 250 feet. He and his mare advanced, and as they got closer, he would soon begin to realize these 2 people didn't seem to resemble men. They had a greenish tint to their faces, wore one-piece suits, and also their walk was very peculiar. As Wolski came upon the beings, he was sure now something strange was going on. His cart got closer and closer, and as they came upon the beings, they then split to the side of the road to let the cart pass. One was on one side, and the other went to the other side. Once the car went past the beings, they began speaking to each other in some sort of strange language that Wolski couldn't understand. They then started walking alongside the cart, and a surprised Wolski did his best to ignore the beings. However, nothing could prepare him for what would happen next. The beings then hopped on his cart and sat behind him, still speaking in their strange language. At this point, Wolski was able to make out more details on the beings. They were around 5 feet tall and wore a tight-fitted gray suit that covered their whole body. The material of the suit looked like rubber. Their head was large and green, and their eyes were almond-shaped and completely black. For a nose, they had 2 small dots, and their mouth consisted of just a slit. While surprised, Wolski didn't appear scared with his mysterious riders behind him. The cart would travel around 100 feet into the open field, and there Wolski would see a craft hovering. The being signaled to Wolski to stop the cart, and he tried, but the mare wouldn't stop at first, as it was so worked up seeing the craft. In order to stop it, the beings had to grab the rope along with Wolski. The cart finally stopped, and the beings jumped off and signaled for Wolski to come with them. Wolski would now glance at the hovering craft, which was about 15 feet long, 9 feet wide, and 8 feet tall. The UFO surface was extremely smooth, and he didn't spot any sort of screws or bolts anywhere on it. It was hovering just below some trees, which were around 30 feet tall. The craft was giving off some sort of whitish silver glow, but oddly the light didn't cast a shadow on the trees behind it. There were also 4 rods at the corners that appeared to be spinning. Like many other cases, Wolski would report hearing a buzzing sound from the craft. It was tough to hear from a distance, but the closer he got, the better he could hear it. Right before the door of the craft, there was some sort of elevator-like device. The platform was being held up by 4 cables, all of which were extremely thin, like fishing wire. Then the platform lowered to the ground, and one of the beings stepped onto it. The being signaled to Wolski he should do the same. One being would stay on the ground and went over to look more closely at the horse. Wolski then stepped through the door and was greeted by 2 more beings. They looked exactly like the other 2. He was inside a rectangular room with grayish-black walls that were smooth and felt like glass. It was about 6 feet high and had a number of seats attached to the wall. At this point, Wolski was instructed to begin removing his clothes. As he was doing this, the being that was studying the horse came up. Wolski would strip down to his underwear and t-shirt, and then he stopped. The beings then told him to take everything off. Wolski would hesitate, but then obliged. One of the beings then grabbed a circular, silver-shaped disc and began to move it over his body. Wolski believed they were doing some sort of x-ray or taking pictures of his body. They then looked inside his mouth, and that completed the exam. Wolski got dressed and was shown the way out. He went out the same way, and the platform lowered him to the ground. As he went down, the beings would watch him. Wolski would then jump on the horse cart and head home. He soon told his wife and sons, who along with the neighbors would go to the meadow. There they would see strange rectangular footprints that went about 1 inch into the soil. In addition, there were black crow feathers. Perhaps the most interesting thing that happened in this case is what Wolski reported he saw below his feet. On the floor, Wolski stated he saw crows that appeared to be alive. He saw their eyes moving, but their bodies were frozen or paralyzed. Over the years, this observation has been analyzed by many, and some believe that the crows were actually some sort of spy device or alien drones that were sent out by the beings. If so, these artificial crows would have numerous advantages, such as blending in and being able to collect information easily and without detection. That morning, Wolski wouldn't be the only individual to spot a UFO in Emilson. Addis Popiotek and his sister, who were siblings and then ages 6 and 4, were in their backyard when they would spot something strange in the sky. Around 8 a.m., Addis would come in the house and tell his mother some sort of craft had flown over their barn. The timeline of the sighting seemed to fit with the same craft Wolski saw, as he estimated his encounter was only 12 minutes. Over the years, a number of ufologists have investigated the case. In general, some ufologists found the Wolski story to be credible, while others believe he might have been tricked. At 71 years old at the time of the event, some questioned his mental awareness, while others in the community stated Wolski had a drinking problem. Still, Wolski was found to be of sound mind by several ufologists. Over the years, though, there's been numerous theories put forth. One of the most prominent ufologists to interview Wolski was Dr. Vladimir Bolnar. Vladimir Bolnar helped popularize the case, although he wasn't well liked in UFO circles. According to Bartos's book, Dr. Vladimir Bolnar had an intense rivalry with ufologist Witold Warzenek. One year, the two made a side bet that hypnotist Lex Stefansky could hypnotize Warzenek and produce false memories. After the session, Stefansky was successful, and Warzenek woke up with a number of false memories. This humiliated him, and as a result, he wanted to get payback. According to Bartos's book, Warzenek decided to get his revenge by creating this story, the story around Wolski, and watching his rival run with the story and fall flat on his face. However, Dr. Vladimir Bolnar investigated and popularized the story so much that Warzenek wasn't able to get his revenge. While Bartos alleged to have documents supporting this story, it's not known if the documents are actually legitimate. Also, while the rivalry was surely a real thing, it seems unlikely that Warzenek would be able to pull off this hoax. In addition, there appeared to be some jealousy from him toward the attention his rival was getting. As such, it seems more than likely that something did happen to Jan Wolski that morning. This case is one of the most famous UFO cases in Poland. It's also the only case where a landmark exists, marking the spot of the incident. While many believe it was a hoax, there's nothing to suggest that Wolski did lie. Wolski was born in 1907 and only read at a 3rd grade level. He almost never traveled and spent his days working long hours on the farm. His case features some common characteristics we usually see. The beings had one-piece tight-fitted clothing, the UFO made a buzzing sound, and the beings seemed to resemble greys, although they were of course green. It's tough to imagine this man could have perpetrated this hoax, considering his busy work life and his long hours on the farm. Wolski would remain adamant about his experience up until his death. On December 23, 1967, 22-year-old police sergeant Herbert Schirmer was driving on Highway 63 around Ashland, Nebraska, when he spotted a red light up ahead. Schirmer believed it was a stopped vehicle and approached it, turning on his high beams. As Schirmer drove closer, though, he would soon come to realize that this was no truck or car, and something he had never seen before. In this episode, we will examine the alien abduction of Police Sergeant Herbert Schirmer. Around 2:30 a.m. on December 23, 1967, Police Sergeant Herbert Schirmer was driving on Highway 63 in Nebraska. Up ahead, Sergeant Schirmer spotted red lights and began slowing down to see if the vehicle needed assistance. As Schirmer drove closer, though, he turned on his high beams and was astonished to see the red lights were not coming from a vehicle. Rather, they were coming from some type of strange craft hovering in the sky. Schirmer remained in his police car and watched in disbelief. The UFO was about 6 to 8 feet above the highway. It was shiny, silver-colored, and disc-shaped with some sort of walkway that circled the craft. The red light he saw was blinking and illuminating through several of the windows on the craft. The UFO would then slowly begin to rise up, making a loud sound similar to a siren. It suddenly shot off quickly into the sky, shooting a flame from under the craft as it flew away. A bewildered Sergeant Schirmer got out of his police car and then began investigating the area the craft was hovering over. He then returned to the police station and noted the strange incident, writing, "Saw a flying saucer at the junction of Highway 6 and 63, believe it or not." The incident was confusing for Sergeant Schirmer, to say the least. He seemed to have time he couldn't recall from that night. We will dive into the missing time aspect a bit more in the video. Schirmer also reported he had a bad headache just hours after the event as well. There was a strange buzzing sound in his ear, as if he had been at a rock concert for hours. Even more strange, Schirmer had several strange marks on his body. One was a red mark on his neck below one of his ears. It was about 2 inches long and half an inch wide. As morning arrived, Police Chief Bill Wagon drove over to the site of Schirmer's encounter. He would find a small metallic artifact, and later chemical analysis showed it was composed of iron and silicon. Investigators from the Condon UFO Research Project stated it was most likely ordinary corroded earthly waste. The Condon Committee was a U.S. Air Force funded UFO research project led by Edward Condon. Schirmer still believed, though, that something had happened to him and decided to undergo hypnosis to uncover his repressed memories. Schirmer worked with psychologist Leo Sprinkle of Wyoming, and the following was revealed around the events of the night. On the night he saw the UFO, Herb Schirmer recalled under hypnosis how several humanoid beings took him from his car and abducted him onto the craft. The beings had gray-white skin, large heads with big cat-like eyes that didn't blink. They had slits for mouths with flat noses. The entities had silver suits with helmets having a small antenna coming from the left ear. They communicated with Schirmer through telepathy. Interestingly, the being's suit had a logo of a winged serpent, something we have seen reported in other alien abductee cases. For example, the Filiberto Cardenas case we covered on this channel had a report of a winged serpent emblem. The beings appeared to be quite similar to the prototypical Greys, but still had some differences, most notably having cat-like eyes instead of big round eyes. Schirmer would be taken to the leader of the beings and be shown around the craft. One thing he would report under hypnosis were the details around how the craft operated. He said the beings used some sort of propulsion unit that relied on the principle of reversible electromagnetism. Schirmer would also recall the upper level of the UFO. It had a large screen that looked like a TV in the middle and was displaying a galaxy. The beings told him that, "This is where we are from, a galaxy next to yours." To the left of the TV was a map with a sun and planets. Also, there was writing in a strange language Schirmer had never seen. In the room, there appeared to be a number of computers, although their purpose was not fully explained. Several sketches of the event were done not only by artists, but Schirmer himself. Under hypnosis, Schirmer was able to sketch the upper level and control room, the leader, and the propulsion system. One of the more fascinating things that seemed to happen during this case was that Herb Schirmer appeared to be overtaken by something during one of the hypnosis sessions. During the session, according to UFO author Brad Steiger, Schirmer began to speak with Steiger and the hypnotherapist as if he was one of the entities. Whatever was speaking said they would be returning from time to time to keep tabs on Schirmer. Also, they said they planned on showing Schirmer the universe. Schirmer would say that he was experiencing mental communication with the beings. Still, Steigler stated they had no way of really verifying the entities or communicating with them, and it could simply be some sort of delusion. In addition, it's possible the being somehow programmed him to react this way. Or it's possible somehow they put in an implant that allowed them to monitor and control Schirmer, especially if he was to be hypnotized. Is this case just one man's delusion, or is there some credibility to it? The case of Herbert Schirmer is certainly an interesting one. It has many of the characteristics we've seen in other alien abductee cases and UFO sightings. Still though, much of the case relies upon hypnotic regression, which somewhat underscores the credibility of the alleged encounter. The fact that the being spoke through Schirmer will lead many to believe a demonic element is at play. This certainly could be possible, as we see the supernatural often creep into alleged alien abductions and alien abductees. In addition, we found the timeline of the events to be somewhat a bit concerning. In the UFO report, it said the UFO sighting happened around 2:30 a.m. in the morning and lasted between 5 to 10 minutes. Herb would then investigate outside the car for some time. The amount of time isn't specified, but probably was at least a few minutes. Then he drove back to the police station, and according to the UFO report, he recalled missing time around 3 a.m. In sum, this seems like a very small amount of time missing at play. According to the timeline of events, he would have gotten in his car around 2:45 a.m., and the police station was probably at least 10 to 15 minutes away. Once again, that doesn't really leave much missing time. Most often, missing time in these cases is quite obvious with hours gone. Still, this doesn't mean this event didn't happen to Schirmer. It could be that Schirmer saw the 3 a.m. time when he got back in his car after walking where the craft had been. Or maybe the missing time was misdocumented some other way. In addition, there were strange marks on his neck, and the hypnosis sessions can't be completely ignored. One other thing too is the serpent emblem, which is a detail that is tough to imagine one would know. It's not known whether Schirmer had further contact with the beings. If this case is true though, and the beings did speak through him, that definitely raises all sorts of questions around using hypnosis for these types of events. In the middle of the night in February 1990, a Ukrainian man would wake up in the middle of the night to his dog barking. He rushed outside, and what happened next would be one of the oddest and most detailed alien abductions in the history of Ukraine. The man would allege to be taken, visit several alien planets, and also converse with dead relatives. In this episode, we will cover this unbelievable story, the alien abduction of Alvin Nikanorovich. In Donetsk, Ukraine, around 1:15 in the morning in February 1990, 68-year-old Alvin Nikanorovich was woken up in the middle of the night to his dog barking. Ivan, who lived alone on a farm, got dressed and ran outside into the yard. As he got out in the yard, he would be stunned to see several gigantic humanoid beings around 9 feet in height wearing some sort of protective suit over their body and head. Ivan was terrified, turned around, and began running away. However, after taking just a few steps, he tripped and fell onto the ground. Next, the beings would hypnotize him, and Ivan would stand and begin walking toward them and following them toward their craft. Ivan would later recall he knew he was under their spell because he left the home unlocked and several gates open, something he never would do. As he walked toward the craft, he could make out that it was round, shiny, and around 40 feet in diameter. It was bluish gray, and Ivan was so scared at the time, he didn't pick up many other details. He climbed up a ladder and immediately smelled the inside, which he said smelled like violet. Inside, the humanoid suits would peel off, and he would now see there were 4, 2 appearing as women and 2 looking like men. Ivan stated the aliens' faces looked human, but their noses were flat. Their eyes were large and round. The beings had small mouths and ears smaller than a human. They had hair similar to a human as well. Ivan would point out the females both looked gorgeous. They had beautiful faces with cropped short hair. It's important to point out here, it's possible they looked different, but might have manipulated Ivan's thoughts to make him believe that was what they looked like. This will become more evident as we dive further into the story. After this, the two females would undress Ivan, and a series of medical experiments would begin. They listened to his heartbeat and also placed something that looked like electrodes on his chest. These provided details on his organs, and as they worked, they communicated in a strange manner, making noises similar to a dolphin. In sum, the experiment did not appear to harm him or cause discomfort in any way. Ivan was then communicated to that he could leave. As he started climbing down the ladder, though, he would once again hear the strange chirping. The beings were discussing something, and all of a sudden one of them grabbed his collar and pulled him back up into the ship. Ivan proceeded to another room, and there he would sit down. The craft would then take off, and an astonished Ivan would look out the window as it ascended, and he was soon looking down at Earth. The craft took off at a high speed, and Earth soon became just a speck. Amazingly, he later recalled, when flying away, he didn't feel anything in the UFO. He got up and walked to another room. This was a control room, and there was a massive screen, about 10 feet by 10 feet. He could see the ship passing by what looked like planets. There were a number of controls and panels being monitored by these giant beings. Perhaps what intrigued him the most, though, was there was a system that detected asteroids and space debris, and it allowed the craft to easily move around it. At this point, his fear began to dissipate as he realized the entities weren't going to harm him. After some time, Ivan fell asleep, and when he woke up, he would be stunned to see the craft was preparing to land on an alien planet. The beings approached Ivan and began putting a spacesuit on him. His suit had a number of hoses going around it and a window to see out the front. Ivan stepped out following the beings, and soon his attention would be drawn to something strange. There were beings standing out in an open field with a river running through it. These entities weren't scared of the craft. The humanoids were small, about 3 feet in height, and had childlike faces which were round. Probably the most strange aspect of these entities, though, was they had fur on their backs and also possessed wings. Still, Ivan didn't see them flying, and after a short time the beings communicated to Ivan to get back on the ship. Once on, he was invited to sit down and eat with the ETs. Several females cooked the food, and Ivan would later recall that their food was delicious. After eating, Ivan would have a few drinks, and the beings would visit several more planets. There didn't appear to be anyone living on these planets, though, as Ivan didn't see any humanoids. This planet was covered primarily by stones and appeared rocky. Ivan got back on the craft once again, and the UFO continued flying through space. The craft would pass a planet covered in all water. In a few minutes, Ivan would see a planet covered with smoke. The beings decided to touch down on the surface. There, Ivan would get out once again and would see a civilization destroyed. There were bones, and all the homes were destroyed. He could see animal bones as well, with many of the bones being gigantic, around the size of dinosaur fossils. Ivan knew something terrible had happened here, and hoped it wouldn't happen on Earth as well. It's not clear if the beings were trying to convey a message here, possibly around the dangers of war and nuclear weapons. Once again, Ivan would get back on the craft, and once again, he would visit another world. This one was nothing like the prior one. This planet was absolutely gorgeous, with breathtaking views, clear skies, and dense forests. There were lots of animals, but no people. Ivan would ask the beings if any of the same animals from Earth were here. They responded no, but stated there were some ones quite similar. After this, once more, they got back on the craft, and next, they would visit the aliens' home planet. As they arrived, Ivan would see the two females exit the ship and he wouldn't see them again. The males would ask Ivan to come with them, and he would soon be taken to something that resembled a church. There, he saw both old and young beings that were singing. He would soon exit the church and see the homes of the beings. In addition, according to Ivan, they all had some sort of flying device that they could use to get around, but most didn't use it because they preferred to walk. Ivan would state the planet was gorgeous, clean, and it smelled like flowers. Based on what he saw, he believed the beings lived much longer than us, albeit death did exist. This is because he witnessed something that resembled a graveyard as he walked through the town. Ivan would later recall in their culture, a common practice was for beings to give food to one another. He was given a fruit-like object that looked like an apple. He would later try to bring it home to support his story, but one of the beings noticed and stopped him. Still on the planet, the being would take him to some sort of factory, one that processed something that looked like yogurt. The entire factory was automated, with the exception of one being who monitored everything. After this, Ivan would be taken back to the craft, and it departed for Earth. After leaving, it would make one more stop before returning to Earth. The craft landed on a strange planet covered with dense fog. Ivan departed the UFO in his spacesuit once again, and soon would hear a familiar voice calling his name. He turned around and would be stunned to see his two sisters, Zina and Nadia, both who died years ago. They both appeared as Ivan last remembered. They would tell him his fathers and grandfathers lived and were somewhere on the planet. Ivan wanted to go and see them, but the beings informed him it was time to go. Before leaving, Ivan would hug his sisters and note later they felt human. He would also ask about his mother, to which his sisters said she was somewhere else. They went on to say she was being temporarily punished as she did not visit the graves of Zina and Nadia. After this, Ivan was taken back home. The snow in the area where the craft had landed earlier had all melted, and there was now a brown circle where it was. For days after the event, Ivan would be incredibly sick. He didn't eat for 3 days, and his whole body ached. What can we make of Ivan's story? Without question, it's an incredible one, and very tough to believe. Alien abductions, where individuals alleged to visit other planets, are somewhat rare, and in our opinion, some of the toughest ones to believe. This is because they usually feel like science fiction, and also because individuals bring back no evidence. That said, there are some well-known cases where individuals alleged to travel the galaxy with ETs. One example is the case of George Adamski. If these are true, this raises the question why the ETs would show humans their planet and also their spaceship. All this said, Ivan's case is surely an interesting one. In 1950, one of the most unbelievable alien abductions would occur in the state of Massachusetts. The case was documented and investigated by Raymond Fowler, a ufologist perhaps best known for his work on the Betty Andreasson alien abduction. Fowler would investigate many cases in New England during his time alive, and this case is surely one of the more interesting ones. In this episode, we will examine the 1950 alien abduction of 13-year-old Betty Aho. In 1950, Betty Aho was living an average American life for a pre-teenager. Betty was living in Westminster, Massachusetts, and frequently went out during the morning to play with other friends in the neighborhood. On one morning in the fall of 1950, Betty left her home and would have an experience she would never forget. Betty walked out of her home and after just a few steps, noticed something up in the sky. It looked like the moon, but the object was growing bigger and bigger. She then became paralyzed and passed out. Next, Betty woke up inside a mysterious room. It was brightly lit, and in front of her were 3 odd beings. The beings looked like typical gray aliens, being 3.5 to 4 feet tall with gray skin, large black eyes, and a slit for a mouth. The entities wore tight-fitted silver suits, something we have seen in many cases. The beings then began to glide toward her. Once they got close, one being raised his hand, and Betty would become incredibly tired. One of the entities assured her that she would be okay and that she could relax. They then escorted Betty, who was floating, into a room filled with smoke. There, Betty would hover mid-air over a table. After some sort of examination, Betty was taken to another room. In this area, two larger beings greeted Betty. They were around 5 feet tall and wearing overalls which were gray. They would inform Betty that they were going to show her something. Betty laid back on a bed, and the beings put some sort of device in her mouth, similar to a mouthguard. It was uncomfortable for her, and as the beings noticed that she was uncomfortable, one would put its hand on her head. It relieved her symptoms, but Betty began to feel like she was spinning. Soon the ceiling turned transparent, and a light flashed through it. She began to travel up through the ceiling. Whether her physical body left or not is unknown, but Betty traveled through some sort of tunnel containing various costumes of humans. It was as if she was in a museum, and the beings had tracked how mankind had evolved. She next traveled through another area. This area appeared to have the history of the beings. There were different UFOs and different artifacts on display as well. Next, Betty was informed she would be meeting the One. The being appeared to be their leader or god. Whatever it was, it communicated with Betty, and the details of the conversation Betty refused to share. She would then return to her body on the craft. At this point, the beings would do something incredibly unbelievable. According to Betty, they removed her right eye and implanted something deep in her brain. The beings would run some more tests and exams, and Betty was then told she could return home. The next thing she remembered was being in a field by her home. Just nearby, Betty could see a craft parked in the field. It was shaped like a spear and had 3 legs. There on the field next to her, she saw 3 beings, 1 taller and 2 small. The small ones were carrying a light globe. This is an interesting detail, which we'll dive into in just a bit. The large being would then turn to Betty and tell her they would look after her and she would be okay. The entity informed her she would forget everything in time. What can we make of this incredible story, though? While this case was examined by a renowned ufologist, it doesn't appear this case was studied too in depth, or by others. It also appears to be somewhat choppy. Still, this doesn't raise any red flags, as it's very possible that many of her memories may have somehow been blocked. The entities even admitted they would block her memory of the event. Betty's memories appear to be conscious, and she also remembers seeing the craft in the field. Still, the details around her eye being removed and put back seems incredibly unbelievable. It's important to point out, though, there are a number of cases where abductees report the beings performing miraculous acts, like doing surgery and leaving no trace. One other interesting detail in the case surrounds the beings holding white lanterns. While this seems like a detail easily ignored, we have seen this on multiple Street of Silence episodes before. In the Utsuro Bune incident, the being was carrying some type of box, albeit it wasn't glowing. Also, in the Virginia Giant case, the being was said to be carrying a glowing box. In that case, a boy seemingly was about to be taken, but his dog stepped up, barking furiously, and it is thought the dog scared off the entities. In addition to the glowing box, many other characteristics of this case align with Betty's story. Betty suffered from paralysis and also described a craft we hear time and time again. Cases with adolescents and children are often difficult to examine. Many believe the cases have logical explanations, like lucid dreams or sleep paralysis. Still, it must be pointed out that adolescents usually don't suffer from the same temptations that drive adults. Also, it's typically easier for ufologists to spot deception. Still, though, it's not known how much Betty was pushed on her answers or whether Answers were even suggested to her. Unfortunately, it is not known what happened to Betty. Did she go on to live a normal life, or did she experience more abductions? Did she suffer any type of trauma later in life? It seems possible that the answer to at least one of these questions is yes. Let's hope, though, Betty was able to live a healthy and happy life. When most people think of Maine alien abductions, they immediately think of the classic 1976 Allagash alien abduction. However, 1 year prior to this case, another abduction would occur in nearby Oxford, Maine. This case involved 2 young men who alleged to have seen multiple UFOs, and one of them was taken. The men were absolutely terrified after the event, believing the UFOs were even stalking them. As a result, one of them even fled town, believing this was the only way to get away from the crafts. This case was examined by multiple ufologists and medical professionals and was deemed to be quite credible. In this episode, we will examine the 1975 Oxford, Maine incident involving David Stevens and Glenn Gray. Around 2:30 a.m. on October 27, 1975, David Stevens and Glenn Gray went out for a drive. The 2 men were transitioning to working the night shift and thus needing to stay awake. They thought heading out could be a good way to kill some time. The men lived just outside Oxford in the town of Norway, and as they entered the car, they began driving on Route 26. As the men began driving, they soon became horrified to learn that something had taken control over their car. The car soon turned down a dark, desolate road. The men knew the road in that it was a bumpy gravel small road. Oddly though, the ride was smooth, and David Stevens would later say that he believed the car was off the ground at this time. The men would go around the curve, and off to the left in a field, the young men spotted a massive UFO craft. It was lit up with several different colors of light. It began to rise over the trees and was completely silent, and the men at this time rolled down their windows to get a better look. They could see just how massive it was, taking up the entire field. At this point, the men regained control of the car and were able to drive away. The craft, though, began to follow the men. It circled from behind them and past them, appearing in front of them about a mile up the road. At this point, a bright white light hit the men, and they both passed out. The car rolled slowly to the side of the road. The men then woke up next in the same spot in the car. The UFO was still hovering above it. The men didn't waste any time, though, and quickly drove away. As they drove off, they thought they had lost the craft, but once again it snuck up on them. The UFO would then take control of the car. It led them down a road toward Trip Pond, which was a lake. There, the car would shut off completely, losing all power, and they were up on a hilltop and down the road about a quarter of a mile from Trip Pond. At this point, the craft hovered around 300 to 400 yards above their car. At the same time, 2 small UFOs would rise up from under the surface of the lake. The smaller crafts appeared to have some trouble ascending, but once they did, after around 15 minutes, all 3 crafts flew off and disappeared into the night. The car was then able to start up, and the 2 men began driving toward David Stevens' mom's home, which was nearby. It was now morning, with the sun coming up around 7 a.m. The 2 men arrived and planned to keep quiet about the event since it seemed so strange. However, after 30 minutes, both men started to feel ill. In addition, Stephen's mom, Beatrice, noticed that the men didn't look right. They were absolutely freezing and couldn't stay warm. The men had on multiple layers of clothes in the house and blankets, yet still felt cold. The boys were also feeling terrified about what happened, and soon local sheriff, Deputy Eldon Bartlett, would pay them a visit. Bartlett was 28 and knew the family. He took their statement and noted just how agitated and worked up the boys appeared to be. Word would reach the UFO community the next day. On October 28th, Brent Raines went to Oxford to investigate the story. Raines had been asked to go by the Center for UFO Studies in Chicago. As Raines arrived, he asked the boys to show him the location of the sightings. On the night of October 28th, the boys and Rain would drive out to the first one. There the boys would get out of the car and walk around the field with Raines. Next, they would go to Trip Pond, and when the boys arrived, they felt intense terror and refused to even get out of the car. The next day, the two men would begin having flashbacks and remembering more, albeit it was small amounts and in bits and pieces. Raines believed that the men could benefit from hypnotic regression. Still, while he suggested it, another ufologist, Miss Shirley Fickett, would begin working on the case, and she would be the person to set up the session. Before diving into the hypnotic sessions and details around the abduction, it is important to point out both ufologists interviewed the men separately and found their stories to be extremely similar, as well as their reactions. Shirley arranged to have Dr. Herbert Hopkins conduct the sessions beginning on December 2nd, with Stevens agreeing. The first session was an experimental session just to see if Hopkins could be hypnotized. Glenn would sit in on the session along with Stevens' parents and Shirley Fickett. In the sessions, the following would be revealed. Stevens said when the bright white light hit him, he was suddenly transported somehow up onto the craft. On board, he was able to look out the window at his car below. Then, a creature would come into the room. The being was about 4.5 feet tall, with pale skin and a mushroom-shaped head. The creature was wearing some sort of black cape and had 3 fingers. It had no eyebrows, but the eyes were large. It had 2 dots for a nose. It began to communicate telepathically and told David Stevens not to be afraid. At this point, David was escorted to another room where 4 other beings were. They told David to get on a metallic table. At this point, they extracted blood with several needles. They then asked David to take off his clothes. David became hostile and angry, refusing to do so though. He pushed one of the beings away. The creature didn't react violently though, and reiterated to David they wouldn't harm him. A terrified David eventually obliged. As he laid on the table naked, the beings pulled down some sort of machine over his body. It was like an X-ray machine. It went over his entire body. Finally, the beings took hair samples and nail clippings. David was then escorted back to the original room and next woke up in his car. It's not known whether Glenn was taken too, although he refused to undergo hypnosis and also had many of the same symptoms as David. Still, David alleges he saw Glenn down in the car from the craft, so maybe Glenn wasn't taken. This night appeared to be the only night the men saw the craft, although for days after the incident the men would be terrified and believe the UFOs were stalking them. They would handle the trauma differently though. David would talk about it and tackle it head on, while Glenn would run away from it. After the initial interviews, Glenn moved to Oklahoma so he could leave the trauma behind. Both men surely suffered, both mentally and physically, from the event. But what can we make of this case? Is it credible? While the case relies heavily on hypnotic therapy, it's important to note that the men were interviewed by a variety of professionals and were deemed to be credible. In addition, their stories were very consistent in the interviews. One other interesting thing to support this case is that a police officer named Lloyd Herrick saw a UFO on the evening of the boys' incident. It was around 12 miles away from where Glenn and David were. He would radio the event in, so documentation of it existed before David and Glenn made their report. In addition to the boys being deemed credible, they also suffered mentally and physically. Both men would lose their jobs, be ridiculed, and also suffer adverse health effects. There were strange side effects felt by the two for quite some time. David Stevens' eyes were bloodshot for a while, and he also alleges his appetite increased dramatically. The men were tested for radiation, but the results came back negative. The case also features many alien abduction characteristics we've seen in other cases. There is the bright white light we see reported many times, as well as missing time. In addition, medical experiments while on board the craft, and the being's description and behavior is very consistent with other abductee reports. We hear all too often the being's message, "We don't want to harm you," and communicate through telepathy. In general, it seems this case, more likely than not, did happen, in our opinion. Let's hope that this was a one-time event and the men didn't experience any other incidents.